And welcome back, fellow football fanatics. This is another episode of College Football with Sam. And today we are going to be discussing a lot of things, including a preview of Penn State and Washington, looking at some of my top Big Ten games, paying attention to the top Big Ten coaches of the sport, or top Big Ten coaches in college football, I guess is the less awkward way of phrasing this. And yeah, I am excited for this episode. I'm excited that all of you are here joining me right now. We have some bold predictions towards the end, some more better or worse series. And I want to go under the hood a little bit with USC and Ohio State. Also debate back and forth with myself whether or not Kyle Whittingham is overvalued at Michigan entering this season. And that is going to be today's episode right there. So sit back, relax, grab some food, and let's enjoy the show. Before we get ahead of ourselves, though, I just want to say make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit the notification bell, make sure to like the video, and comment, be active in the chat. That's something I love to see in between these segments when I get a brief moment to pause and look at things. It's just seeing you guys all active. And it's important that all of these live shows do well and perform well. That's on me, and you guys can play your part too. And for dedicated viewers, make sure you tune into Tuesday's stream, because not only are we going to have more elite college football content and analysis, including a Big Ten tier list, including a new series we're starting, there is going to be not a sponsor for the channel that will debut then, but there will be a special message for, I think, a very important project that I am fortunate and blessed enough to be a part of. So that's going to be debuting on Tuesday, and we're going to talk about that some more on Tuesday. I wanted to get to it today, just didn't have the time to, and was planning to get to it last week, but you guys will see it on Tuesday. So that's the last of all of my announcements and of any of my announcements. So let's get started and check in on the top 10 Big Ten games of the 2026 season. Tell me who your top 10 games of the 2026 season will be for the Big Ten. We're going to be looking at Big Ten games here. Let me know in the live chat, maybe for a few seconds or a few minutes after this segment, I can review some of those lists and shout some of them out. And if you do have a super chat you want to send, we don't always get a ton of super chats in live shows or a ton of super comments, and I get that because this is more of me feeding you guys information, unlike other shows, which are much more engaging. But I always reply to super chats and to paid comments, and you can see for yourself in many of my videos, I reply to non-paid comments too. So being engaging is one of my many goals, so engage with me, and I will engage with you. Ohio State, Indiana, Michigan, Oregon, USC, Penn State, much of the Big Ten this year has a loaded slate. All of these 18 teams have games this season that can decide the Big Ten championship race, the college football playoff race, and consequentially the national championship race and the college football playoff picture. And I'm ranking the 10 biggest of these Big Ten games. These are the 10 best Big Ten football games, and my personal criteria is both the quality of the matchup, so how close, how entertaining, how competitive is this game going to be, and the combined strength of the two teams participating. That is my criteria here. Let me know what your 10 best Big Ten games for the 2026 season are down below. Let's start this off with number 10. Number 10, or this is not number 10. My apologies there. Did not mean for that to be number 10. Let's start off with the biggest Big Ten game of the year, that being Oregon at Ohio State. It was close. It was very close between this matchup and Ohio State traveling to Indiana, which we will talk about here in actually a few minutes. Why I have Oregon at Ohio State as the number one Big Ten game this fall is twofold. Number one, I have this as a pick'em in my personal power ratings. I know right now the spread, the very early spread available is Ohio State -6. I have this as pretty much a 50-50 game, even factoring in the travel for Oregon. And it is a bit of a revenge-type game in the regular season, much like Indiana at Ohio State is, or Ohio State against Indiana. However, last time these two teams played was 2 years ago, when Ohio State blew out Oregon in the Rose Bowl. The last time they faced off in the regular season, Oregon escaped with a 1-point win at home, clearly the inferior team even at the time, but they won the game anyway due to a variety of things that went their way, due to them creating their own luck, playing well, Ohio State having its worst day on defense, etc. These are the two favorites right now to win the Big Ten. The top two teams from the Big Ten in terms of national championship odds, as Oregon just passed Indiana recently in that category. You have Dan Lanning, a top 5 head coach. You have Ryan Day, who I think is among Kirby Smart and Curt Cignetti as a coach with an argument to be the best coach in college football. Julian Sayin and Dante Moore, DeCorian Moore and Jeremiah Smith, Bo Jackson and Jordan Davison and De'Aaron Hill Jr. You have Kenyatta Jackson Jr. and Mateo Uyunglele, Brandon Finney and Devin Sanchez, Jalen McClain, and Aaron Flowers and Coy Parrish. I mean, you have elite talent everywhere. The reason this edged out Indiana and also my apologies, guys. I got a little bit. Hold on. This might take a little bit, but just to avoid any confusion here, because I got confused by this. I can't believe pre-show I forgot to do this, but I did. We usually go... we usually save the best for last, and I want to do that here. So I'm going to reorder all of this and just start the segment over in a clean way. Okay, so that should be set up there. And then for this, we have... Yes, this will not be... This will not be hard. This will be much easier. So apologies about this, guys. Got a sneak peek. This is not what the segment will look like when it is released, probably tomorrow. Yeah, I mean, it's that game. It is... It's going to be a really good game. The Big Ten has such an elite slate of games this year. Unlike last year, really last year, the minute Penn State cratered, you knew the slate was going to suck, because Penn State was the team who played Oregon and Ohio State both in the regular season, and no one else really did that at all. Like, Illinois didn't, USC didn't, Michigan didn't, Wisconsin did, but Wisconsin wasn't any good either. Penn State did, and it turned out that Penn State was just a good power ratings team, but nowhere near good enough of a team to be able to compete at the national landscape. So, again, apologies for all of that interruption and stuff. Should have remembered that I had to reorder all of this before, but I did not. So let's just redo this, and it should be more entertaining, because for those of you just joining now, or for those of you watching this, the best for last is just a better content strategy. Save the best for last, wait, and slowly reveal something. And it's also more exciting to build up the tension of, wait, what's the best? We're already getting through these good things. What can be better than this? Ohio State, Indiana, Oregon, Michigan, USC, even Penn State, Nebraska, Washington. There are so many Big Ten teams that have wonderful schedules, that have tough slates, and all those teams have games this season that could decide the Big Ten, shape the college football playoff race, and in this video, I will be ranking the best 10 of these games. My criteria for the top 10 Big Ten matchups is the combined strength of both opponents, and also the quality of the matchup, how close I believe these teams, whether it's Oregon at Ohio State, or Ohio State at Indiana, or Michigan facing Penn State, The criteria for how I determine which games go where is how competitive I expect the matchup to be and the combined strength of both teams. Starting off with number 10, and let me know your top 10 Big Ten games for 2026 down below. The 10th best Big Ten game, in my opinion, is USC at Indiana, slotting it at number 10. I see this game as a really key game for both teams late in November, where USC and Indiana are two of my top 10 teams. I have Indiana power rated second, and I have USC power rated 10th. Both of these teams are kind of in a weird spot in terms of their program history. USC is in the Big Ten for only its third season after being in the Pac-12 all of its life cycle. Indiana is good for its third year in a row after sucking for its entire life cycle. So these are really new Big Ten programs. These are new possible Big Ten powers. Indiana is a Big Ten and national titan. USC has the potential to be that. And that's what makes it fascinating right there. That's why it's in the top 10 on top of the combined strength of both teams. Because I got to tell you guys, when I look at how these teams match up, it's not good. I think that Indiana's 77.3% chance to win per ESPN's FPI is a bit too kind to USC. This is a bad matchup for USC. A very bad matchup when looking at what USC wants to do in terms of running the ball and using that to establish Riley's passing attack, observing what USC's defense has been the past few years, and that's probably not being transformed into a top 10 defense immediately. And Indiana's only getting more talented. So from a neutral field angle, Indiana is the better team, clearly. That's why the early odds are Indiana minus 10.5. That's why FPI has IU rated ahead of USC quite comfortably. What makes it worse, though, is it's on the road in the month of November. Both teams have a bye before this game, but the game before that, Indiana hosts Minnesota. The game before this matchup and before the bye for USC is at home against Ohio State. So Indiana will be coming in not as exhausted, both emotionally and physically. They won't have to deal with the travel, and you have a severe coaching deficit. This is one of the biggest coaching deficits for any team featured in this segment. In this game would be Lincoln Riley coaching against Curt Cignetti, USC's assistant staff against Indiana's assistant staff. But this is the 10th best game because USC's a really good team. There is a world where they keep it close. I don't think there are many worlds, if maybe any, where USC wins here, but it's going to define the college football playoff race. It's going to define the Big Ten race. If USC somehow wins this game, then they're either national title good or Indiana's taken a huge step back here. USC could enter this game ranked higher than Indiana. They could beat one of Oregon or Ohio State at home or both and enter this game undefeated or with only one loss, and Indiana could enter this matchup losing back-to-back to Michigan or Ohio State, or beating one of them, but being ranked lower due to not having the same number of quality wins as USC's schedule is tougher. So it's a really fascinating game here. I can't wait to watch this one. It's not 10th because of how late it is in the season, though. That has entirely to do with the quality of matchup. That's the reason Iowa hosting Ohio State is 9th on this list, is I expect this game to be closer than USC traveling to Indiana, mostly due to Iowa being at home in Kinnick, Ohio State having to face one of the top defenses and defensive coordinators in America, as the Iowa Hawkeyes under Phil Parker routinely play at a top 10 level on defense. Iowa has a good offensive line. Ohio State's clearly the better team, though. I'd be very surprised if Iowa were to win this game. I think that their 12.4% chance to win is accurate, really. Maybe you could go a little bit lower or a little bit higher on that win probability there, but Ohio State's clearly better. They were better last year, even though Iowa was really impressive. In my mind, clearly a top 20 team. In some metrics, you could argue even a top 15 team. What makes this a bit more competitive in my mind than game number 10 is the style of play here. Ohio State is under Arthur Smith. I presume that they are going to try to move to more of a ball control offense. Ohio State not once last year moved away from slow tempo, and hiring Arthur Smith just indicates that you're going to continue with that style of ball. They are going to, not all the time, but likely the offense will improve, but the desired limiting of possessions is going to be similar. On top of that, Iowa's defense is really good, and Iowa's offense likes to do something similar. Limit possessions, keep the clock moving, keep yourself in the game or ahead of your opponent. For Ohio State, it's always keep yourself ahead of the opponent because you're better than 98% of the teams that you could ever play in a given season. I expect Ohio State to win. Ohio State will probably win by more than the scoreboard indicates here, but this early spread of 7.5, and I personally would have the spread around there myself in my own model. Yeah, this is going to be a good game. It's going to be a game where if Iowa somehow pulls it off, it's going to be because they win the second half. As Ohio State is more talented, they're going to enter there with the better coaching staff as well. There is a coaching deficit in this game for Iowa, for the underdog here yet again, and a coaching edge, surplus, whatever you want to call it, for the favorite here. So, competitive game. Ohio State's schedule's loaded, so you're going to be seeing them a whole lot more. But, yeah, it is going to be a game that can shape the college football playoff race, because say Iowa somehow wins, they're probably going 10-2 with a win here. Or if they're able to beat Ohio State at home, who's to say they can't travel to Washington or travel to Michigan? They're only games against likely top 25 teams the rest of the year, and beat one of those teams too. A 10-2 Iowa with a signature win over Ohio State would get in the playoffs. For Ohio State to lose this game or be even capable of losing this game probably means they lost to Texas, and you'd be looking at a 2-loss Ohio State before half the season's over. And at that point, their college football playoff hopes could be in jeopardy. Could being the key word there. But much like USC beating Indiana, I'd be a bit surprised if Ohio State were to drop one to Iowa. Though it is on the road in Kinnick against an Iowa team that no longer has the 131st offense. Michigan at Oregon is next up here, number 8 in my top 10 Big Ten games for this fall. This is due to strength of team. Much like USC traveling to Indiana, I think this is actually a carbon copy of that game. And what do I mean by that? These teams are very different. Kyle Whittingham's a different coach than Lincoln Riley. Michigan's roster is different from USC. And Oregon, they run things differently than Indiana does. Like, they are both Titans, but they, Ohio State and IU, clearly have their differences. Why am I saying that it's carbon copy the same thing? Well, look at the spread, the way too early spread. It's too low, and it's already in the double digits. This is a game where it will shape the playoff race, and it's any given Saturday. There is a world where Michigan wins here, but I do think giving Michigan a 16% chance to win here could even be slightly generous. It is tough to go on the road to Autzen and win as the inferior team. The last team who did that was Washington in 2022, and that was to an Oregon team who was not top 10 good. This Oregon team at worst will be top 3 good. I have them power rated first. Michigan, much like USC, I have a fringe top 10 team. Michigan will be traveling several time zones over. Oregon is coming off a road trip to Ohio State. If they lose that game, they're going to be angry here and want to take out their anger, as we saw them do against Rutgers last year on the road when Indiana came in their house the week before and beat them. If they beat Ohio State, they could overlook Michigan, but even if they do, it is a bad matchup. What Michigan will want to do with Kyle Whittingham is they will want to run the quarterback. They will want to run the football. They will want to get these receivers involved, as this is one of Michigan's strongest receiver rooms recently. It's a stronger receiver group, much stronger than what Utah had when Whittingham was there in any of his years recently. And it's a weaker tight end room than some of the tight end rooms Whittingham and his OC Jason Beck have had there, or it's at least of similar quality. Oregon with their secondary and with their defensive line, and also with what Michigan will want to do defensively, where they will be inexperienced at linebacker and safety. The boundary of their defense, the perimeter, the defensive ends, the corners will be Michigan's strength. Oregon will be fully capable of attacking the middle of the field with their tight ends, with their center returning, with their running back. It's a bad matchup here. Now, it's a very high-quality game, and that is why it is on this list. As we get closer to number one, the odds of the favorite winning are going to get tighter and tighter and tighter on average. And Michigan has the potential of being more than just fringe top 10 good. I could be a bit higher on Oregon than perhaps I should be. And that's why this game is number 8. It's going to be a high-stakes game. It will be a game where Michigan will enter this with probably only 1 or 2 losses. Oregon will enter with a loss, or they'll be undefeated here, I think. And at that point, you're looking at a top 10 game. You're looking at a game that can kick Michigan out of the college football playoff race, put Oregon a bit in jeopardy as they have to play Washington still to finish the year, or take them out of the Big Ten title conversation, which would put the pressure on their staff to perform in a postseason run. It's going to be a fascinating game. That's what I know for sure. Michigan at Ohio State is game number 7. The game, after all. How couldn't it be on here? The only reason it's not higher is the quality combo of both teams and of the matchup. I have Ohio State 3rd in my Big Ten power ratings. Michigan is around USC, so I have Michigan 4th for now. I could drop them to 5th or even 6th. And because the game's being played in Columbus, where Ohio State's the superior team with the superior staff, I get a spread in my power ratings that's 11.5. So the quality of the matchup is not going to be elite. It's good. Michigan will fight here. Ohio State will fight. And Michigan, I do believe, unlike some of these other previous games we talked about where Michigan's traveling to Oregon or USC to Indiana or Ohio State even traveling to Iowa, this is the first game where I'd say the underdog has like a path to winning that doesn't involve the favorite sucking at something on the field. Michigan can win this game and just straight up beat Ohio State, even on one of Ohio State's average or even better days, if Michigan plays its cards correctly. Do I think this will happen? Probably not. Ohio State is preseason number 1 in non-human intervention power ratings. So if you use any type of priors and you exclude human intervention there, Ohio State's pretty much going to be universally power rated 1 preseason because of the power ratings they've had for the past several seasons, the great job they've done building the roster, developing the roster, scheming in game. Michigan's done a great job building their roster, but not so much the scheming part or the development part the past 2 seasons. That's why they had to bring in Whittingham to replace Sharon Moore. Whittingham and Day have actually played each other before in the 2021 Rose Bowl. They're both a part of the Urban Meyer coaching tree, technically, though they have had influence from other coaches, of course, due to Day being in the NFL and Whittingham being the defensive coordinator at Utah before Urban Meyer came over and did a really good job for 2 years with that program. It's going to be exciting because there's a bit, I think, of an identity change here. Ohio State seems to continue to move towards being bigger and slower, and I think their current 2027 recruiting class is emblematic of that. And Michigan, it feels like, is trying to get lighter and faster in a way. Maybe not the lighter part, but the faster part for sure. And it seems as if we are moving away from the older Jim Harbaugh style for Michigan that Sharon Moore tried to continue, and the Ryan Day style that he tried to continue with Chip Kelly and Brian Hartline while still adapting to the metagame. And now it feels as if they're crossing each other's former paths in a way. So It's going to be interesting. The team typically who wins the rushing battle in this game, whether in yards per carry or whether in total yards, usually wins. I said last year I thought maybe it could be the first time where that doesn't happen. Ohio State did end up winning the total rushing yards battle, but Michigan won the yards per carry battle. You could see that possibly again this season, depending on how certain things pan out. I do expect Michigan to have a better rushing offense, and the rushing defense I could see both of these teams being even in. But Ohio State just has QB, wide receiver, and safety down to such a degree, along with an overall edge at most positions where, yeah, I do think Ohio State should be favored here by double digits, and they'll probably win. Game number 6, we have Indiana at Washington. Why is this game so high? Washington is the lowest rated team I've talked about, and it's an interesting game. There aren't even odds released for this game yet, which is pretty funny because this game will have more consequence than USC at Indiana. It will. It'll have more consequence than Michigan traveling to Oregon, because the spread in this game, unless Washington disappoints or Indiana is insanely amazing, is like better than last year good, this will be a single-digit point spread. The cross-country travel, Washington upgrading their roster, them returning a lot of their production. Husky Stadium, if Washington is good, is a ruckus, loud place to play. And the matchup here. Washington's run defense was insanely good last year. They only allowed like 4 yards per carry, and that was taking away the sacks they had. That's pretty impressive when you play Oregon, Michigan, Ohio State, Wisconsin, not really. Wisconsin sucked at running the ball, but you played Antoine Raymond, Bo Jackson, the young Oregon backs. You played Justice Haynes and I think just Jordan Marshall. I don't think Justice Haynes played in that game, but they played Jordan Marshall. A lot of good running backs and rushing offenses, and they did a good job against them. They were a defensive team, and Indiana is a run-first team. The reason Indiana runs RPO so much and why they ran RPO so much last year is their rushing offense was the most diverse and balanced in America. Notre Dame's had more explosiveness and had a higher capacity for destruction because of their NFL running backs, but it was them or IU that had the nation's best rushing offense last year. IU could run zone, they could run power, they could run to the outside, they could run in. They could do anything because their receivers, linemen, and tight ends knew how to block downfield in the run game and were strong and were experienced and had good chemistry. And they run RPO because if you're really good at running the ball and you have the precision passer that Mendoza is, well, he'll make the correct read almost every time they run RPO. So that buys himself and his receivers more time and his running backs more time to let the play develop. It compounds on the success of what Indiana does so well already, which is run the ball, and on their success at receiver and QB, and helps their offensive line out a bit. So they're a run-first offense, very clearly. It's a similar misconception people get about USC. They think, oh, Lincoln Riley, QB, pass-heavy. No. His best offense has averaged like 6 to 7 yards per carry. Sometimes more, sometimes even a tad bit less. But they're run first at their best. It's why their offense in 2024 wasn't all that great, because they were a bit more pass heavy than they ideally should have been. And with Washington returning the middle of the defense, stacking talent on defense with Ryan Walters being in year 2, I think Washington has a good chance to take away some of what Indiana wants to do here, potentially better than most other defenses. I mean, they run a traditional 7-man front. That's what Ryan Walters' defense did with Illinois. They ran that 3-4 and were primarily known to just physically pound you and play just really good football up front with Jerzon Newton, and they had very physical defensive backs as well and good safeties that could impact plays up front. It's a road trip for Indiana. This will be after they play USC at home, And in the past few games, they would have also played Ohio State at home and Michigan on the road. So it's the end of a long run for Indiana. They're only 2 weeks removed from their bye. And for Washington, it's the first game of a 2-game stretch against Indiana at home and Oregon on the road. Washington should enter this game anywhere from undefeated to having 2 losses. So they will need this win to be firmly in the playoff conversation. They will sell out for this game. Indiana, they will sell out because they're Indiana, and that's what makes this so fascinating. You have a top 15 team, 13th in my ratings in Washington. Indiana is 2nd in my ratings. And these teams, last time they played was in 2024, where Washington, given the travel and given some of the mistakes they made, like throwing the ball to D'Angelo Pons twice, and one time was a pick 6, they played Indiana pretty admirably that day. And that was a really rough situation that Jed Fish inherited that year and that Curt Cignetti also inherited that year. And you look forward to this season, and Cignetti has had the most historic program turnaround in college football history that overshadows Fish's turnaround at Washington, but it shouldn't. He's done a good job too. So this is a type of turnaround matchup, high quality. It's going to be more competitive than a lot of the matchups we talked about so far for the reasons that I mentioned. DeMond Williams is not the face of Washington in the same way that this season people will be talking about Josh Hoover as the face of IU, and I get it. He's the quarterback, the most important position. These are 2 defensive teams, and Washington will be a run-first team, even with all that they lose at running back, if their offensive line pans out. And much like Indiana, much like Ohio State, they return a lot up front. So I'm excited for this one. Oregon at USC, we're getting into the top 5 here. The Trojans under Lincoln Riley are 0-2 against Oregon. They have never beaten Dan Lanning, and every time they play, it's weird. Every time they play, USC plays them competitively on the scoreboard, but the game really isn't competitive by the end. In 2023, Oregon, I think Bo Nix averaged over 10 yards per pass attempt against that defense, and they kind of let USC get back in the game after leading, I believe, 36-14. USC fell a 2-point conversion short of making it a 1-score game. Oregon then ran out the clock. Was not as close as the 9-point margin of victory indicated. You get to last season, and if Oregon doesn't commit a zillion yards in penalties, this game may have been a blowout. Like the same trick play that was a disaster against Notre Dame, they ran something very similar in one-on-one coverage, and it just happened to work against Oregon. There's another world where that doesn't work at all. So I look, also Oregon's entire offensive line or close to it went down. They still played well and won by 15. So it's interesting because me personally, I think Oregon from a coaching standpoint, from a roster standpoint, and a program standpoint, is miles ahead of where USC is. Part of me is shocked that the early odds are 5.5. I think that's a bit overreacting to Oregon's postseason failures and a bit of people buying USC stock early in the season. I think Oregon should be favored by a handsome bit more than 5.5. I know it's the Coliseum, but Oregon doesn't have the same travel disadvantage going to the Coliseum that a Penn State, Michigan, or Ohio State would. Oregon's not going to get the same jet lag. However, now to be a bit favorable to the USC side, the 2 times USC under Riley played Oregon were on the road. They were in Autzen. Now they get to host Oregon. The first 2 times they played, Oregon had already been recruiting at a pretty high level, at least for one cycle beforehand. And they had like the definitive coordinator and play caller edge. Offensive play caller would always go to Riley in that matchup, but they had the far better defensive mind and coordinator. Last year, I'd probably say Lynn's a better defensive mind and play caller than Lupoy, but it's not obvious. No, let me correct myself. It's obvious, but the performance didn't indicate that. You had to look into some other things. This season, there's a coordinator change in the defensive side for USC and on both sides of the ball for Oregon. So USC now has the edge in coaching continuity, could have the edge at both play caller spots. There's a world where that's the case. you look at personnel, and USC from a raw talent angle has closed the gap on Oregon. I don't know if that will translate in this game because that is your freshman class for USC. They'll have a few contributors, but how many contributors, especially in the month of September? It's fascinating. This is a game where, look, if USC comes out and wins, there's doubt immediately cast on Oregon, and even more so, there's hype for USC. If they beat Oregon here, and Ohio State has to travel multiple time zones over to play them, they could be favored over Ohio. They could be favored in all of their remaining games if they beat Oregon. I mean, I don't know about Ohio State or Indiana, especially Indiana given the road trip, but yeah, this game could bring USC their college football playoff berth and allow them to compete for a national championship. If they beat one of the big three this year, provided they don't lose a stinker to an inferior team, which is possible, see Illinois last year, see Minnesota and Maryland the year before, nearly losing to Cal the year before, that, UCLA, almost losing to Arizona, for example, Tulane the year before that, you get the point. Lincoln Riley has said that USC is entering its championship window. Now's your time to prove it. And same with another game involving USC that we will talk about here shortly. But before that, we have to get to Indiana traveling to Michigan. Early odds indicate this is IU being favored by about 6 points. I also have this as a single-digit point spread. Michigan is coming off of a home game against Penn State, so it will be their second home game in a row off a bye. Indiana, this will be their second to last game before their first bye, so they won't have the same rest advantage, and they'll be coming off an emotional game, whether a win or a loss, against Ohio State the week before. It is a bad matchup, I think, for Michigan in a way. And the reason I say this is because we don't know yet how Bryce Underwood is going to perform. If Underwood takes this massive leap and has moments of being a precision passer, well, given Indiana's zone-heavy coverage, and if Underwood becomes a precision passer and is capable of picking apart a disciplined zone, with how high Michigan is internally on its defensive line and on its ground game, they could win this game. They could. And we shouldn't be surprised by that. However, at the same time, if Underwood improves in a big way, but he still has inconsistencies throwing the football, or if he improves marginally or just by a good bit, even if he becomes a precision passer, this is assuming that Michigan's defense will do a good job against IU's offense. We don't know that for sure. The quarterback position here is very intriguing. You have two QBs who, given the staff upgrades and supporting cast upgrades they receive, should be much better, and yet the public and the national media is very hot or cold on them. Universally, they're cold on Bryce Underwood. They're either hot or cold on Josh Hoover. And that's going to be fascinating here, because I don't even know if QB will determine this game. A huge part of it will. Likely it will. But Michigan is so talented on the lines of scrimmage, if they're able to extract that talent, and Indiana is so much deeper and could be so much better on defense than they were last year, and possibly in their rushing attack, where the team with the quarterback disadvantage could win this game if certain things go a certain team's way, or one team plays their cards in terms of preseason development and preseason roster building far better than the other one. You have two of the top staffs in America. Indiana has my best staff in America. Michigan has a top 10 staff. It's in arguably top 15. The Big Ten is the conference of coaches, and this is a matchup where Indiana has, look, they've sucked for their entire school history. Michigan's been an underachieving blue blood for the past 20 years, and now Indiana is a titan. Michigan is not that far removed from a 3-year run of success capped off by a national title. I'm excited to see how this game goes in Ann Arbor. I think that the key to this game is really going to come down to run defense here. Both of these teams, as of right now, will have my top 2 or 2 of my top 3 rushing offenses in the Big Ten. So whoever has the better run defense and whoever's quarterback is going to be able to or quarterback and receivers are going to better be able to play off of that rushing attack is going to determine this game. I can also see this game coming down to special teams if the quarterbacks for these two schools are playing more towards their, lower end of outcomes, which is only worth mentioning because of the national media perception about both of these QBs. Ohio State at USC is game number 3. Ohio State way too early is favored by 7.5. I'm going to tell you, given that Oregon's only favored by 5.5, and I imagine Vegas is baking in, Vegas, Jersey, all the sports books are baking in some type of travel number, this is way too high. If Oregon at USC is 5.5, Ohio State at USC can't be 7.5. There's no way. This is one of the first times, I'd argue, and this is why these games really start to get interesting. This is a game where the matchup can go one of two ways, just like the last one. Michigan, if they take a high enough step at QB, and D-line and O-line could have a matchup edge over Indiana. Washington could. We just talked about USC possibly having some type of play calling edge over Oregon, finally getting home field. The past few games have been about, well, maybe there's a path for the underdog to have a good matchup edge here. The first few games were, they're really good teams, but the matchup edge is clearly with the favorite. This is a game that comes down to, it comes down to hold on. This comes down to 4 position groups. Both offensive lines, Ohio State's linebackers, and USC's defensive line. I don't care that much about Ohio State's defensive line in this matchup because of what USC will probably have at tight end, because of their system of running the football, and that I've seen it play out, and I need to see Arthur Smith and how that gels with what Ohio State wants to do in the rushing offense before commenting on it. And knowing that Jade Mailata and the chemistry he'll have with his tight ends and receivers is probably going to be close to as good as what Ohio State has between Julian Saint and Jeremiah Smith. Not as good in terms of the quality, but the chemistry, the connection, and knowing, when to get the ball out and where. There's a world where USC might even be better at that, even though their passing attack cannot be as lethal because of how good Smith is and because of how accurate Sayin is. I mention Ohio State's linebackers because of how important they are to Patricia's system. The linebackers last year were the only reason they held Indiana to 13 points. Caden McDonald played his part, the secondary played their part, but linebackers who are NFL caliber against RPO, which USC is capable of running and does it quite well, they were able to kill Michigan's defense, which had, I would say, a lines of scrimmage edge in theory. They killed Michigan there with scheme, murdered them. And Michigan's linebackers being a bit young and undisciplined was a huge part of that. Same with Wink Martindale being a dunce. Patricia will not be a dunce. But say Ohio State's linebackers take a huge step back, and there's a world of that happening because there's a chance both of their linebackers last year were the top 2 prospects, and they were older than this batch of linebackers. They were longer, older, bigger, faster, stronger, freakier, just better. What if USC is able to run just enough and play off of that with RPO and play action, and Ohio State's linebackers are biting a fair bit? Well, then, given what USC has on offense and the fact that they're at home, and this is a sandwich game for Ohio State before the trip to Oregon and after the trip to Indiana, you're probably going to see Ohio State's defense get shredded if that's the case. And USC will move the ball comfortably on every drive, and it will come down to the other matchup, which is Ohio State's offensive line versus USC's defensive line, which in theory, you would say Ohio State will push there or have an edge, but USC's defensive line is very talented. So if they develop properly, and Ohio State's also does, or maybe develops to a lesser degree, there's a world here where USC is actually able to have some type of lines of scrimmage edge, or use their scheme to create one. And that's what's so fascinating here. Do I think this is guaranteed to happen? No. Do I think it's likely to happen? I need to see them both play some games. I think the odds are a coin flip as to which team will have the edge in those areas, and that's why I actually have this game as pretty close to a coin flip here. I would favor Ohio State, but not by much, by no more than a field goal. The travel and the spot this game is in, I know they have a bye after this game. I'm well aware of that, but USC has won 2 weeks earlier. And Ohio State, they're going to play Oregon after this at home, and they already traveled to Indiana 2 weeks ago, and that's going to be a very competitive game. USC will have a game against, Wisconsin on the road before this one. So it's a tougher spot for Ohio State than it is for USC, and it's a game where USC is probably going to have to put all their cards on the table, or they'll have the opportunity to, given where it is in the schedule, because they have a bye after this game, so they can sell out for it. It's fascinating. I think the preseason odds are really underrating USC in this matchup, but I do, as of right now, think Ohio State should be favored to win or will win, because again, there is a coaching deficit here that USC is going to have to overcome going up against a top 3 staff in America. Game number 2, Ohio State and Indiana. This is bounced between Indiana -1.5 and Ohio State -1.5. It's another game that we're talking about where either team can have a matchup edge over the other. Like, you look at what Ohio State has from a talent angle, well, of course, they could match up well against Indiana. And then you look at what Indiana did last year, and you see what they have returning on the lines of scrimmage and on defense this year, where Ohio State returns more on the offensive side of the football. And remember, in last year's matchup, the 2 best units in that game were Ohio State's defense was 1, Indiana's defense was 2, Indiana's offense was 3, and Ohio State's offense was kind of like a distant 4th, along with their special teams unit. And that was able to help Indiana win because Ohio State's defense in that game was the best unit on the field. At least I thought they were. And I think the evidence of that is Mendoza's deep shots were contested catches, and Ohio State's big plays were uncontested. Like, Indiana had the 50-50 plays, and Ohio State had some explosives they were able to create independently due to a talent edge. This time, the game's being played in Bloomington, not Columbus, not in the Big Ten title, though there could be a rematch in the Big Ten title, as there could be with a lot of these games we've discussed. And it's fascinating here. Ohio State should get stronger offensively and weaker defensively, and the inverse should happen with IU. They should get a little bit weaker offensively and stronger defensively. So the keys to this game here, I think for Ohio State, is just how much do you regress on defense? And for Indiana, it's a bit of how turnover prone is Josh Hoover, because Patricia he's a defensive mastermind. And I strongly believe that this year Ohio State will force more turnovers on defense because they didn't do that at all last year. And they will not have the elite NFL capacity on defense to hold top-end offenses to 13 points. They won't have that because the middle of the defense is losing 3 generational players, possibly even from an NFL standpoint, and a really good nose tackle. That is a lot that you're losing there. And their most physical corner in Igbinosun. They're losing their best corner. They're losing their best players up the middle. And Caden Curry was their most productive defensive end last year. They're not going to have the same players. They're going to have to win games defensively differently than they did last year. And Patricia will be capable of that because he is a genius. You look at Indiana's defense, they should get better, but Ohio State's offense should too. So now instead of can Mendoza beat Patricia and his defense, how does IU's offense do against this Ohio State defense, being a little bit more important than the other matchup, where I feel like entering that game, if you looked at the analytics, you knew that Indiana had the better offense. The question was Ohio State's defense so centennially good that it would just make that point irrelevant? And it didn't, although it came very close, holding IU to 13 points. This year, I think you're kind of looking at the other thing here. We will know that Indiana offensively probably will have a turnover produced here with what Hoover will do, at least through the air. And it'll come down to, look, Indiana held Ohio State's offense last year to 10 points. And, you know, there's a world where Ohio State scores 20 or even 17. And they do return a lot this year. But Ohio State loses their top 2 out of their 3 receivers, Carnell Tate and Max Clare, and they lose their best blocking tight end. Those are important positions, even though the offense should get better. So it's really going to, as a cliche, as in most Big Ten games, it's going to come down to probably rushing offense and whether or not Ohio State will hit the 50-50 balls in the same way that last year it was whether or not Indiana will hit the 50-50 balls. With Hoover's gunslinging mentality, he will take more risks from a preseason angle than Sayin will. Given IU's RPO system and the fact that I do think they'll have the better defense than Ohio State will this year, Indiana will probably, in theory, create more like open situations here, I think, against Ohio State's defense than Ohio State's offense will create against this Indiana defense. But Ohio State also has Jeremiah Smith, who can win contested catch balls easily, who can get open even against the best defenses. It's going to be a really exciting game. I mean, the spread's going to be close. I have this thing, Indiana being favored by a little bit more than a field goal, but that's because I have IU power rated ahead of Ohio State a little bit preseason on top of home field advantage. It's going to be a close game. It's going to be hyper competitive. You have the 2 best coaches and the 2 best programs in this game. It wouldn't shock me if either team wins. I mean, I don't view these programs exactly the same. I view them in the same category, but they're different. And from a historical angle, Ohio State's way better, clearly. I mean, who would have thought this game a few years ago would be a matchup of Big Ten Titans, a rematch of the Big Ten championship game, a rematch of who the 2 best teams in America were last year. This is going to be so great. You're going to have the number 1 defense in Indiana, I think, against certainly inarguably a top 10 offense, maybe a top 5 one, could have the number 1. And you're going to have an inarguable top 10 defense from Matt Patricia, potentially top 5, against an offense from Indiana that's coming off being the number 1 offense in America. But how much of that was Mendoza being round 1, pick 1? What's the drop-off from Hoover there? And what does replacing that many receivers look like? What does replacing the tight end room and running back room for Indiana look like? How I would put it here is IU has more variance here in a similar way that last season when these teams played Ohio State had more variance, where Ohio State had the best unit on the field in the Big Ten title game. They also had the worst units on the field. And I think we could see that flipped here. And yet last season it was a coin flip game. This season I expect probably much the same. It's going to be close to a coin flip, or if someone is favored, it's going to be favored in a competitive way. Doesn't mean things can't get out of control, though, because remember, the last time Oregon and Ohio State played each other, it was out of control. Absolutely out of control. The last time Indiana and Oregon played each other was out of control. Oregon's been in a position where they have suffered plenty of out-of-control losses. Several of them. And that's unfortunate. But this is my number 1 game in Big Ten play, and it's for 2 reasons. Number 1, I have Oregon is better than Ohio State, but they're traveling cross-country. So while I have IU over Ohio State with more than a 50% chance of IU winning, this is a true coin flip, where flip a coin, true 50-50, not 55% heads, 45% tails, as a normal coin flip is with a quarter. You're looking at true 50-50 here. I believe Oregon's roster is better. I think that they match up well with Ohio State, given that I don't think any offensive line in America, minus Georgia and Notre Dame with talent, or IU with their scheme, is capable of blocking Oregon's D-line. But Ohio State's coaching staff is better, and they're a top 5 team. They have the best player on the field in Jeremiah Smith, and Dante Moore and Julian Sayin are what we just talked about with Indiana and Ohio State. Sayin has less variance. His ceiling isn't as high as Moore's, but his floor is higher. Moore has that capability of having, well, what the hell are you doing moments, but also has the capability of, just looking like a round one, pick one QB, where saying, again, so far, I think we need to see more. Some of the stuff he can't control, just measurables, which is why I don't want to get into that too much. But you have the two best QBs in the Big Ten, in my opinion. They're both top 5. And if they both have the same seasons they did last year, this season, or more like slightly better, they're going to both be picked in the first round. So you have the most NFL talent out of any combination of games occurring in this game, both future NFL talent for sure, likely present NFL talent as well in the Big Ten. I say that because Indiana is old again and probably has more talent NFL-wise than they did last year. You have a coaching staff in Oregon's that has some questions, but I think is really good. And Ohio State's is borderline elite, and their title 2 seasons ago and their reloading job last year was insanely impressive. Oregon's offensive line, I just criticized Ohio State's in saying that it probably has a permanently negative matchup here. There's a world where Oregon does. They're returning not a whole lot on the O-line, particularly at tackle. And Ohio State returns Kenyatta Jackson, and they have enough talent up front and a good enough secondary with the transfers they brought in where this could come down to the rushing attack. More likely than not, I think for Ohio State it comes down to, what does Oregon's defensive backfield look like? How well do they call the game against more veteran coordinators from Ohio State, coordinators that have greater prestige, a better reputation? And does my perception that Oregon's roster is just better, is that good enough to take over the game? And by take over, I don't mean win in a blowout. Like, if anyone's blowing out someone here, it's Ohio State because they're at home with the travel edge, and Ohio State could be better than Oregon. But takeover is in Penn State, Oregon last year, where Oregon's in a game with Ohio State and they slowly start to pull away because there's just a different caliber of athlete at enough positions to be the better team. I have a hard time seeing two things here. Oregon having a definitive coaching edge, I have a hard time seeing that. And I have a tough time seeing Ohio State have a definitive lines of scrimmage edge. So what makes this matchup fascinating to me is I think both of these teams in playing each other have permanent obstacles that they're going to have to work around. They can't just overcome them by getting stronger at those positions. If you're Oregon with the coordinators you're replacing, you're not going to have a better staff than Ohio State at the end of the year. Like 99% of the time, you're just not going to have that. If you're Ohio State with what those players in the offensive line have showed you for several years now, and what you lose on the D-line, and the fact Oregon has clearly the most talented D-line, and they have had a better reputation on the O-line now for 2 years in a row than you have, understandably so, looking at the production, the rushing offense, just watching the teams play, 99% of the time entering this game, you're either going to have a push at the lines of scrimmage or a disadvantage. You're not going to have an edge here. So they're going to have to overcome that. These teams are. And on top of that being a coin flip game, Oregon being power rated first, Ohio State being power rated fourth, these being two of my national title favorites, it's going to be a fantastic game. I've already overstayed my welcome here. This is a super long video, but I'm having a blast with it. My graphic designer, he's wonderful. His name is Jake. Thank you, Jake, for making this channel elite and just doing such a damn good job. He had some games that he was, arguing me with that they should be on the list. So I wanted to mention some games that he thought deserved a shout out here. Iowa at Michigan in week 4. Interesting storyline there. Two older coaches who had long tenures at their schools, legends in their own right, in Kirk Ferentz and Kyle Whittingham. Washington at USC. USC has to play Oregon the week before, week 4. And in week 6, they have to travel to Penn State. So in week 5, they have a bit of a sandwich game against a team in Washington who, honestly, there's a world where they're better than USC this year. I don't think that'll be the case, but if at the end of the year, Washington's power rated over USC, that wouldn't shock me. Washington again is mentioned, and Iowa's mentioned again in week 6. It's a Friday night game, 9 p.m. Eastern time. You got, according to the national media, opposite styles of team. These teams are pretty damn similar, I think, in terms of style. It's just going to come down to, is Iowa better enough than Washington to overcome the travel edge? I say no, but it's fascinating. USC at Penn State that same week, the day following, though, on Saturday. Going to be the whiteout for Penn State. Matt Campbell has a few signature wins over Lincoln Riley. I think he is the better coach than Riley now, but I also believe, much like in all their previous matchups, Riley has the better roster, and I also believe since the last time they played, Riley has evolved as a coach, so it's going to be interesting. Penn State is mentioned again in Week 7 and Week 10 when they have to travel to Michigan in Week 7 and to Washington in Week 10. Penn State, they're going to win 8 or 9 games right off the rip, and at the absolute worst, 7. They pretty much have 6 to 7 automatic wins baked in their schedule. The question is, what do they do in the other 5 to 4 that aren't automatic or close to automatic wins? And those are three games. I have them as clear underdogs to Michigan and Washington, and it is a true coin flip against USC. So it's a huge season for Penn State, even though the schedule's pretty easy. Nebraska at Iowa, Wisconsin at Minnesota, USC at UCLA, and Washington at Oregon are some rivalry games that you all should be paying attention to. The Heroes game is going to be as intense as ever, as Iowa should still be a good team and still have a more competent offense than they did under Brian Ferentz, and a top 15 and arguable defense under Phil Parker this year. Could be top 10 and likely will be yet again. And Nebraska should have their best team ever under Rhule. Wisconsin traveling to Minnesota could decide the job security of either of those coaches. I don't think Fleck is on the same hot seat as Fickell, obviously, but say Minnesota goes under their preseason win total of 5.5 and goes 5-7, and Wisconsin goes 8-4 and beats Minnesota, there might be grumblings about whether PJ Fleck is well past his prime with the Gophers. He's tried to leave the Minnesota job beforehand, and Fickell, if he's still around by that game, will need that win. USC at UCLA, Washington, Oregon, old Pac-12 rivalries. UCLA with Bob Chesney, can they usurp USC and Lincoln Riley in year 5? And Washington and Oregon, this probably will be the least competitive game that we've talked about in this honorable mention series, but it's a high-quality matchup in terms of the strength of both teams, and it is a rivalry game. And Washington played Oregon admirably close last year due to shutting down their rushing attack and forcing Moore to beat them with his arm, which he eventually did. So it's going to be a fascinating series of games there. Those are my top 10 Big Ten games for the 2026 season. Let me know what you all think down in the comment section below. Okay, that took way too long, and I mean way too long. That took an hour. So we're probably going to be here until 8, guys. Probably going to be here until 8. But you know what? We have those moments sometimes, and that's part of what makes this show great, I think, is sometimes I go on long tangents and go more in depth than I intended to, and I think you guys appreciate that. So make sure, if you haven't already, to like the show, to hit the subscribe button, to click the notification bell, to do all of those things, and be active in the chat. Buckeye T800, are you like a Ohio State? That actually is your profile photo, isn't it? You're an Ohio State Terminator. Thank you for being active. Thank you, Easy, for being active. Thank you, Glacier Path Trading, for being active. Thank you to Moody Meatball for being in the chat and being active. A Trojan Fight, thank you for commenting, and so many others in here. Thank you for commenting and being a part of this awesome show. Let's get on and let's talk about my top 10 Big Ten head coaches, or just Big Ten coaching rankings entering the 2026 season. I got a question for you all about this that I want you to answer in the live chat. Is Curt Cignetti already a better head coach than Ryan Day? And would you rather have Dan Lanning, Kyle Whittingham, or Matt Campbell leading your college football team right now? Those are the debates at the center of my 2026 Big Ten head coach rankings, where I'm ranking every coach in the conference, starting from 18, going all the way up to number 1. Every Big Ten coach is ranked by a personal and somewhat subjective criteria of mine: wins, losses, my perception of their performance in big games against the top 10 of ESPN's FPI, how they've constructed and developed their roster and staff, and also a bit of projection. So let's just get into that right now. The first group of coaches that I want to look at are 18 through 13. Mike Locksley at 18, Barry Odom at 17, Pat Fitzgerald at 16, Matt Rhule at 15, Schiano at 14, and Luke Fickell at 13. That's the group of coaches that we are looking at right now. The first third, the bottom third of the Big Ten. Locksley I clearly have at 18th because I think that he has had more talent than a lot of these coaches have, with the exception of Fickell at Wisconsin and Matt Rhule at Nebraska. We'll get to them in a little bit. Locksley, to have Malik Washington, who is a good quarterback and will be when he leaves Maryland, to have Zahir Mathis and Sidney Stewart, to have some of what they did, like Jalen Husky and others on defense, to have an offensive line that only allowed like 10 sacks, and some higher level schools got some of their linemen in the portal, and to do all of that after starting off 4-0, having that schedule, and at one point looking like you're going to shut out a good Washington team. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the epitome of bad coaching. Locksley is kind of a decent program builder, but decent at best, and he is a trash head coach. Not a bad person, not a trash person. There are really good head coaches that are trash people. Locksley is I think a good guy based on what I hear from his press clippings, what I've heard from past media days. I just think that he's mishandled NIL at times. He has mishandled game management, and he does not know how to get his team up in big games to face adversity. I don't know what else to tell you. It's not just the big games. It's not just the fact that he's never beaten Michigan, Ohio State, and only beat Penn State in the COVID year. It's also the fact that he has lost to Illinois teams or Northwestern teams that are the average FBS team or even a below average FBS team in power ratings. It's the fact that he last season lost to Jonathan Smith when Jonathan Smith already knew that he was fired. It's the choking to Washington, the choking to a mediocre Nebraska team. It's all of these things that go into it. That's why he's 18th. Odom at 17th, I admittedly would like to know more about. I know that he was the coach at Missouri and fielded some competent teams there, but ultimately got fired. I understand that he was a defensive coordinator at, I believe, Arkansas after that. And then he was the head coach at UNLV and did some good things at UNLV. And I believe that just because of that he actually had some success at the G5 level where Locksley has not. And his situation roster-wise at Purdue last year was worse than anything Locksley had, that he deserved to at least be ahead of Mike Locksley. But that's kind of it, right? I mean, Purdue went 2-10 last year. They were markedly improved, but they even had a game against Northwestern where I believe the final score was 19-0, and they very clearly quit. So I can't have him too high, because the proof at the Power 4 level just isn't there. For Pat Fitzgerald, in theory, you can make an argument that it is, but in the NIL era, so technically 2021 and 2022, and even more so in recent memory, 23 onward, in 21 and 22, he only won 4 games. He averaged 2 wins per season. Just before the 2023 season, he got fired, and David Braun's had some success there. Some with Pat Fitzgerald players, and in other moments, he has had new quarterbacks, transfer quarterbacks. And the fact that he did not have success in the NIL era and then took a few years off, 3 years to be exact, from college football in that era, and some of the staff moves he's made, like Nick Sheridan as his offensive play caller. The defensive staff I love, don't get me wrong. I think Rossi's an underrated DC. LeVar Woods is a pretty good number 1 special teams coach in America. I love the hiring of Max Bulla. Their defensive line coach, Winston Deladabadure, did well at Minnesota, and before he left for the NFL, and then I believe got fired from there or maybe exited out after I believe the previous Cardinals coach got fired, and now they have Mike LaFleur. So it's intriguing. It's just the recent proof isn't there, and I could see myself next season putting Fitzgerald closer to 10th than to 18th, but I need to see it a little bit. Matt Rhule at 15th. This is fascinating. Fascinating for a few reasons here. I have him behind Schiano. I have him behind Fickell and a few other names, and yet I would sit here and tell you that I think Matt Rhule deserves a B- grade or C+ or B, like somewhere in that range, due to his time at Nebraska. You'd be thinking, well, how does he get that grade if he's 15th in your coaching rankings? And my answer to that would be there is a big drop-off, or at least a sizable one, I think, from 15th in Rhule to Fitzgerald at 16th. Fitzgerald, if, say, he left Northwestern for Michigan State and didn't take that time off and had some successful seasons in between 2020 and 2025, I would certainly put him ahead of Rhule. What Fitzgerald did at Northwestern is as impressive as what Rhule did at Baylor, and he has done that over a much longer tenure. But Rhule has showed flexibility and adaptability in the NIL era, and I just need to see that again from Fitzgerald. Rhule's biggest weakness is game preparation and game management. That's his biggest weakness. He is a better program builder than anyone, I think, in the bottom three of the Big Ten. And you combine that with Nebraska's history and resources, which I think only Wisconsin or Michigan State could rival on this list, but Michigan State is in total disarray, and Wisconsin was in total disarray, I think, until this preseason, and they still are probably, but to a lesser degree, they now have an athletic director whose strength is fundraising, whereas McIntosh didn't do any of that. Rhule has an opportunity to really jump up this list, but you can't, how do I put this kindly? You can't get plastered by interim head coaches, and he got plastered by two of them last year. Biff Poggi and Terry Smith. You can't get blown out by one of PJ Fleck's worst Minnesota teams after his first year there. You just that game was, I love Nebraska. It was funny to watch because the offensive line play was so bad that it was almost like a comedy skit. And at the same time, I felt super bad because Nebraska fans don't deserve that, and yet it happened. There are too many games that are winnable, or if you insert other head coaches with that roster, they straight up win, possibly dominate, that Rhule has lost or come close to losing or has gotten hosed in. So I can't have him higher than 15th. Schiano and Fickell I won't spend too much time on because I think that their situations right now are bad, and I struggle to see hope for Schiano beyond what he's already done at Rutgers. I just do. Reason being, Rutgers does not have NIL in place. I think Schiano said last season, like, they finally have something, but something isn't a whole lot when the Big Ten probably has the best average NIL out of all conferences. I have some hope that they'll rebound from what the past two seasons have been in terms of defense, but they have limits at Rutgers. They do. Schiano, I think, nonetheless, is at least a good average head coach, probably past his prime, but he's making adjustments on defense this season, and he found a really good OC for a school like Rutgers and Kirk Ferentz. So how that quarterback battle pans out and how the defense improves under Travis Johansson in year one will tell me a lot about where Schiano is as a coach. Because if they hit on QB and they hit on defense and they already have Duff and Raymond, that's too many good evaluations given their limitations for me to not level up Schiano in my rankings. For Fickell would have to contend for the college football playoff for me to raise him up a bunch. I know that they've dealt with a lot of unlucky injuries, and that's part of the reason I have him as high as 13th, because his current resume at Wisconsin would put him down in the Odom, Loxley, and Fitzgerald category, with the wins, the losses, some of the pathetic performances they've had, particularly against Iowa the last 2 times they've played them, where they made Iowa look like a top 5 team. It was admirable that they didn't quit last year, but the wins they had against Illinois and Washington just are not sustainable to win games like that. And they didn't quit against Oregon, they didn't quit against Indiana. They were never winning those games, ever. And they had the same amount of yards as Minnesota did, and yet PJ Fleck had so many games last year where the talent profile and the post-game win expectancy profile told you, they shouldn't have won, and then they did. That should be Luke Fickell, given his time at the G5. Luke Fickell should be winning games consistently that he has no business winning, and then taking care of your Marylands and taking care of your Minnesotas with what he has. And he just hasn't done that. That's why I have him at 13th. 12th, he got PJ Fleck. PJ Fleck at Minnesota, my goodness, a bit lower than I would have had him in past seasons. I just have not been impressed by the previous 3 seasons where they have had a 6-7, 8-5, and 8-5 record. So you are looking at 22 and 17 right there. You're looking at barely above 500. That's what you're looking at. And I understand, like, Minnesota last year had a tough schedule, playing Oregon and Ohio State and Iowa's best team since 2020 or 2019. And also playing a Cal team on the road that might have future round 1 pick 1 in Jaren Kiwa Sagapolatele, I think is how you pronounce his name, JKS. But still, they have not had the level of play consistently that I saw from their 2019 through 2022 teams, with the exception of the COVID year, which was weird for everyone, so I don't count that, particularly for Fleck, given how many players they had opt out and get sick earlier in that season, and then as the season went on, they got better. It's a huge year for Fleck. If they go under their win total, he's a good enough coach where if he went to a bigger program with more resources, he'd do well. I know that he's a good coach. I just don't have enough evidence of consistent winning and doing a whole lot more with less than other coaches. Like, what Chesney did at Holy Cross and JMU is as impressive as what Fleck has done at Minnesota. What Cignetti has done, more impressive. What David Braun has done. Let's talk about Chesney and David Braun together. They're both younger in terms of perception because they haven't been in college football that long. You know, David Braun is 2-1 against PJ Fleck, and Northwestern does not have the recruiting base or the ability to accept transfers that Minnesota does. David Braun has 2 seasons at Northwestern with a winning record in the NIL era. And he has had several games in those seasons where they lost, but they were in those games or they lost competitively. They could have beaten Nebraska last year. There's a world where they play Tulane closer than they ended up doing. They almost and probably should have beaten Michigan. Like, they were closer to a 7 or 8 win team regular season wise than they were to a 6 win team. That's good coaching. If David Braun had the roster Michigan did last year, and Sharon Moore had the roster Northwestern did, then David Braun wins that matchup by 50 points. It's been incredible what David Braun has done. And what Bob Chesney's already done at UCLA on the recruiting trail is impressive. What he did at JMU after, Curt Cignetti took a lot of those good players with him, and after what he did at Holy Cross, that's impressive to me. And I'm doing a bit of projection with these coaches again, and I think you really see that with Bob Chesney, that I already have him close to the median Big Ten head coach, and certainly close to the mean Big Ten head coach there. I love a lot of these coaches inside the middle third. I just can't put them higher. Bielema at 9th. He's a top 25 head coach in my book. A lot of people say that I hate Brett Bielema in Illinois because I was low on them last year, and that was actually due to good research. I was pretty low on them entering 2024, and the research I did on that wasn't exactly the best. This year, I'm fairly low on them again. So I'm traditionally pretty low on Illinois under Bielema. And I admit part of that was due to me overlooking them. I don't hate Bielema, though. How can I hate a coach and have him ranked top 25 when he hasn't yet made the playoffs and he also hasn't been competitive in big games? The past 2 seasons, Illinois' record is 19-7. They are... they're 0-4 against FPI top 10 teams, and their closest game was a 14-point loss to Penn State in 2024, who missed 2 field goals. And it felt like that game was a larger win than a 14-point win. So to have that resume where they're winning a bunch of close games and they're not always sustainable and they are getting destroyed by these big teams, that's the mark of a good coach. But you're closer to Kirk Ferentz or even to Lincoln Riley, who I have at 8th, and Jed Fish at 7th, and Matt Campbell, who are great coaches, but you're not Curt Cignetti, you're not Ryan Day, you're not Kirby Smart, to mention a non-Big Ten name. Lincoln Riley is at 8, and I have him at 8, and it's conflicting because I feel like Riley is a top 15 quality coach, certainly top 20. But while I'm projecting that he'll do better, I think the biggest reason he'll do better is because of the resources he has. And the fact that he is growing as a coach, and I do project that in the next few years he'll pass some guys ahead of him. But I can only project just a little bit. The evidence so far in 4 years at USC shows that when he faces superior coaches or teams with superior talent, he folds. He doesn't win those games. There's no game outside of maybe LSU in 2024 that I have seen USC win with definitively inferior talent. Maybe Michigan last year too. But at the same time, USC had a first-round pick and a far better QB. So even though they may not have had as deep of a roster, they had the better quality team and better quality starters, particularly on offense. So Riley's not actually good. I think he's a step above Bielema. I know he lost to Bielema last year and Bielema's inferior resources, but Riley is a NFL mind, and he's still fairly young. So I respect him as a coach. I wish I could put him higher. I'm bullish on USC in the future, but the struggles with defense and this is one area where, as of right now, if you came to me and said Riley for one game or Bielema for one game, it would be tough. On one hand, if my team is offensively focused, probably would take Riley. If it was defensively focused, probably take Bielema, and depending on the certain play style. But one thing that coaches on this list have over Riley is just clock management, is game control, understanding what tempo and what pace to use and what plays to call, rather than trying to call the coolest and most offensively biased games and schemes in the world. Jed Fish at 7 is very similar to Riley in my estimation. Both offensive coaches, both calling plays for their teams. But Fish is better because he's had a similar track record at Washington that Riley said at USC, but he has less resources and started off with an inferior roster. Riley took over for Helton, but could bring a lot of a talented OU roster with him, including Caleb Williams. Fish took over from DeBoer, which is better to take over than from Helton, but he had less of DeBoer's team returning to his team than Riley had some of Helton's good players coming back, particularly on the offensive line, to his team. And he didn't have the same type of players that he could bring with him from Arizona to Washington that Riley did from Oklahoma to OU. So as of right now, what Fish has done at Washington is more impressive than what Riley's done at USC, especially when you consider that I think Washington, even factoring in home versus away, Washington was more competitive against Oregon, who is one of the top Big Ten programs, than USC. And Washington, under Fish, has beat USC once under Riley. head-to-head. And just look at the 2023 game when Fish was at Arizona. He coached circles around Riley. Caleb Williams just did what he did that year. Saved the team. We're in our top 6 now. And I think this is pretty self-explanatory. All of these coaches are top 15. Kirk Ferentz at 6, Matt Campbell at 5, Kyle Whittingham at 4, Lanning 3, Day 2, and Curt Cignetti at 1. As of right now, I would rather have Lanning at my program than Kyle Whittingham or Matt Campbell. Or Kirk Ferentz, but Ferentz I think is obvious due to the age factor. Whittingham is the age factor too, but Whittingham has shown more innovation on the offensive side of the football. So that does mean something. I would say that to separate this in tiers, Ferentz is top 15, Campbell and Whittingham are top 10, Lanning, Day, and Cignetti are top 5. And then if we're doing a tier, which doesn't just show placement but the distance between the coaches, Cignetti is way up here, like at the top of the hexagon at the top of the screen. At the top, so even above what the screen can show. Day is in the middle of the hexagon, so pretty close, but I think there is somewhat of a noticeable gap. Lanning is like all the way here, like, or actually more like here in comparison to them. Very, very obvious noticeable gap. If you say that Lanning is better than Day or Cignetti, please leave the live stream right now. And then Whittingham, I think Whittingham is worse than Lanning by a slightly larger margin than Day is worse than Cignetti. And then Campbell, by about a similar margin, is a little bit worse than Whittingham. And then there's a slightly bigger gap, and you have Ferentz at 6. That's how I would put it. Ferentz, the consistency is there. The NFL model for development is there. There's an argument to be made that they are a contender for Development U due to how lowly they recruit and the success they've had on O-line, on defense, even recently to a limited degree at running back, and certainly special teams. Quarterback and receiver just stink for them. And last year, even though the portal in theory should hurt Iowa, because I don't think they have the donor capacity that some of these other Big Ten schools do, and they've always been a very development-heavy recruit who we want to recruit, an anti-portal type program, or at least it's coded that way. I think that this current era has benefited them in ways because their scouting is so good, and they made the switch from Brian Ferentz to Tim Lester when NIL really started to become a thing for everyone, not just the top half of college football. Campbell's at 5 because he has less resources than Ferentz. His track record at ISU has been about as good as Ferentz has been. And even better, recently he's beaten Ferentz. He has a 2-1 record against Ferentz over the past 3 years. And that means something to me. He's beaten him in, actually he's 3-1 over the past 4. Beaten him twice in Iowa City, or in Kinnick Stadium, once in Ames. Yeah, I think it's Iowa City and Ames is where the teams play. I know my geography well in some regards. I always get the Iowa teams confused for whatever reason. But Campbell has a winning record over Ferentz over the span of one whole recruiting class. And he has even inferior resources. And I don't know if it'll work out at Penn State due to Penn State's expectations and why they hired him and fired Franklin. But he's a damn good coach. And as long as Penn State can provide him with top 15 or top 10 resources, and they let his development cook and are patient with him, I think that he'll do well there. Whittingham is at 4 because he's more offensively innovative than Campbell or Ferentz, and he is closer to Phil Parker than John Heacock, the defensive coordinator of Ferentz and Campbell, respectively, in terms of defensive acumen. So I think you get the best of both worlds with him in comparison to Campbell and Ferentz. Like, that's the do more with less group. Cignetti would be included in there, but he's just in his own category with do more or less. And then Lanning and Day are younger coaches, both under the age of 50, that are recruiting powers, that are hot commodities and names, or at least once were, on their respective sides of the ball. Lanning defensively, Day offensively. Ironically enough, recently they've struggled with their side of the ball. Lanning has rarely, if ever, had a better defense at Oregon than offense, and Day over the past 3 seasons has had a better defense than offense at Ohio State. It's kind of funny, something to keep in mind. Lanning I have as my 4th best head coach nationally. It then goes Ryan Day 3, Kirby Smart 2, and Curt Cignetti 1. That's how I would grade it here. Lanning and Day are very similar. The biggest difference is Day has gotten over the hump and Lanning is yet to do that, and that is why there is a big gap between them. The gap also exists between Day, Sig, and Smart, between them and Marcus Freeman, or them and Steve Sarkisian, or them and Mario Cristobal. Like, getting over the hump and winning big games, several of them over a large span, is important to me. Like, Freeman and Cristobal each had those postseason runs, and that's why a lot of people now rank them ahead of Lanning and Sarkisian, but they only did that 1 year, and the years around those aren't exactly good in big game performances. Lanning, I have at 4th over those guys because he's actually beaten, he beat the best team out of any of those other coaches that they played. Like, 2024 Ohio State was insane. Freeman never had a chance to beat them the first time he played them. Cristobal would have never beaten them that year. Cignetti got trounced by them. Kirby Smart, with the injured Georgia team he had after the SEC title game, lost to Notre Dame, certainly wasn't going to beat that Ohio State team with the health of that roster. Just wasn't going to. And Lanning, by hook or by crook, in an unsustainable way I admit, the first time he played him, he beat him. And that means something. He beat Texas Tech last year. He has overcome these road tough games that are like a test of honor, a test of manliness in the Big Ten by beating USC and Iowa and Washington. Ryan Day and Curt Cignetti, it's pretty obvious those are the top 2. Day is a natty, Sig is a natty. Day has had several big wins in his career spanning 8 years now. Curt Cignetti's only been there for 2 years, but to do what he did at Indiana, that's insane and impressive. Like, and again, like Freeman and Cristobal that I just mentioned, they didn't win the natty. Cignetti did, and winning that final game means a lot, especially when you consider that Cignetti's never had the talent that Lanning, Sarkisian, Freeman, Cristobal, Day, and Smart have had. He's never had the rosters those 6 have, and it will take him a while to have a roster like that. And yet he's already done it, and it has commanded the first ever 16-0 season in modern college football history. So, to answer my questions from earlier, yes, I believe Curt Cignetti is already a better head coach than Ryan Day, and I'd rather have Dan Lanning than Kyle Whittingham, Matt Campbell, or Kirk Ferentz to command my program right now. All of those coaches, though, are pretty damn good. The Big Ten is the conference of coaching. They have the best coaches in college football, and I mean, I look at that top 3 nationally, where I have Kirby Smart, Curt Cignetti, and Ryan Day. The Big Ten is 2 of them, and those group of 3, that bundle, after that, in a big drop-off, you have Lanning at 4th, in my mind. And I think Whittingham and Campbell are, one of them's clearly top 10. One of them is inarguably top 10. And the other one, there's an argument for that. So it's a strong list of coaches, but they have to be ranked. They have to be rated. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Okay. I already got to take a break, but when we get back, it will be time for a Penn State preview. So sit back and relax. The vast majority of this segment is already done and over with, by my estimation. So we should be we should be pretty quick with this. So again, just sit back, relax. I'm going to be back in 5 minutes, maybe 10 at the most. And it's just going to be to get a drink of water, because at this point I already thought I'd be halfway through or 2/3 of the way through. Instead, we're like a third of the way through in terms of topics. Or actually, if it's just topics, we're like really a fifth of the way through. But these topics won't take nearly as long. So I'll see y'all very soon. Just sit tight. And welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for your patience here. Really appreciate it. Nice to see that at least some of you stayed. I know a lot of you did drop off there, but I do understand why that would be the case. All right, though, let's get back to it and discuss my Penn State football preview for 2026, giving a record prediction, previewing the team, and all of that good stuff. Let's get to that. Let me make sure that I'm in the... Okay, I am in the right position right there. So, all right. Penn State enters 2026 with a brand new head coach in Matt Campbell. Thought I had to sneeze there. Or maybe I still do. Penn State enters 2026 with a brand new head coach in Matt Campbell, who left Iowa State after building the winningest tenure in program history there to take over a Penn State football program that fired James Franklin in the middle of the season. Campbell brings his quarterback, Rocco Becht, and offensive coordinator Taylor Mauser with him from ISU. He also poached D'Anton Lynn from the USC Trojans. So let's take a look at Penn State and give a record prediction for them at the end of this segment. Penn State, over the past 5 years, it's been the same story. It's been the same narrative, according to Penn State fans. It's been good, but not great, or great, but not elite, as James Franklin famously said in a 2018 presser after losing to Ohio State that season. And under Franklin, Penn State never got elite. I think Penn State fans in their narrative and perception are largely correct, actually. 7-6, 11-2, 10-3, 13-3, back to 7-6. Franklin at the end of the day got fired because he lost more small games than he won big games. If that collapse never happens last year to UCLA and Northwestern, and they simply go 9-3, losing to all the big teams, losing all the big games, I don't think he gets fired. If they have the slump they did last season, but in 2021 won 10 games, or they beat Ohio State once more, say in 17 or 18, and they never have those weird 6 or 5 loss seasons in the COVID year and the year following, I don't know if he gets fired. But he ultimately was more guaranteed to lose the big games than to win the smaller, medium-sized games. That's what got him canned at a historically, inarguably top 15 program in Penn State, and I would argue a top 10 program in college football history in Penn State, in that 10, 9, or 8 spot in program history. The rosters were not the problem. It was the position that Franklin put those rosters in and the development and coaching that was the problem. Penn State last year went 7-6, 3-6 in Big Ten play, winning the Pinstripe Bowl, and their win total this season is a 8.5 win total, juiced to the over. This team was effective at running the ball, but not elite at it. Their passing offense was incredibly pedestrian, even with their portal additions last season at wide receiver. And the defense started off good, was rated in many efficiency metrics in the top 10, even after the Oregon game. And then it all just kind of fell apart. The run defense was pretty bad. The pass defense was serviceable, but Ohio State still tore it apart, as they did to anyone who had a suspect passing defense. And the special teams was the bright spot of the team. Blocking punts, returning a block kick against Iowa for a touchdown, having a good punter, having a good kicker, having good coverage there. Elite special teams unit. But that was really the only part of the team that was elite. That was it. And they needed a lot more than that to be elite for them to not just win a national championship last year, but to compete for a national championship, as I and many other pundits thought that they would. This 2026 schedule with an 8.5 win total is intriguing, because when you have an 8.5 win total with this schedule, what you're basically being told here is that you have 7 guaranteed wins, maybe at worst 6, maybe at best 8. And what it's going to come down to are anywhere from 4 to 6 games where you're either going to be an underdog or a very short favorite. And those games in my mind are Northwestern, USC, Michigan, Washington. Those 4. And then if we were to add a 5th and 6th, I'd probably add Minnesota and Wisconsin to that list. So Purdue, the final 2 games and the first 3 games, I think, are pretty much automatic wins if you're Penn State, or something very close to it. There is a chance that one of those teams plays Penn State competitively or tough, but I just don't see it right now in the preseason. This is a season that will be determined by a Friday night game at Northwestern, a whiteout game hosting USC, and road trips to Michigan and Washington against teams that, per my estimation, at this rate have better rosters, and their home field advantage will be quite noticeable against Penn State. But Matt Campbell, I believe, is a top 10 head coach. I think he is a coaching and strategic upgrade over James Franklin. So that means that these big road games where James Franklin never won in a full big house, ever. He won in 2020. If 2020 simply had crowds, Michigan probably wins that game if it's anything like a normal season. I mean, he never won a big game on the road, ever. And there's a chance that could change this year because, well, I think Franklin is a better recruiter than Campbell, might even be a better program builder at a top-level program because of that. Campbell can coach. Campbell can manage a game properly. Campbell can call up a nice series or rally his team together to out-clutch the other team for a big win. And this roster, some people have called it Iowa State East. Others have said that this roster is a, Penn State roster, just with better coaching. And my analysis here says it's a bit of both. Rocco Becht, Carson Hansen, Chase Sowell, Brett Eskildson, Benjamin Brahmer. You look at Cooper Ebel and Marcus Neal Jr. and Jeremiah Cooper. Those are all players who started for Iowa State last year. Caleb Bacon as well at linebacker. You look at players such as Tony Roas, Darius Dixon, Zion Tracy, Marcus Neal Jr., and Kobe Howard, Cooper Cousins and Anthony Dunco, and Andrew Rappelia. These are players that either started at times for Penn State last year or were in the rotation and key rotational players, who most of whom were good. It is a mix of both, really. The talent drop-off is going to be noticeable from a star standpoint. From an on-field standpoint, it's possible, but I don't know how noticeable it will be. Last year's team was one of Franklin's more poorly developed teams. The offensive line regressed. The defensive line regressed. And this is from the beginning. If Penn State made noticeable upgrades in the O-line or D-line last year, they would have convincingly beaten Oregon. Because in the end of the year, at the beginning, many models and power ratings thought, oh my gosh, Oregon might be the best team. I even thought that for a week or two. And then as the season went on, we realized, oh, no. Penn State was just a good team, and Oregon is a near-elite team, and near-elite beats good almost every time. And Penn State played it close, but not close enough. Tony Roas is an All-American caliber player. Darius Dixon can be. Zion Tracy can be. Even some of these, particularly on defense, Iowa State transfers can be. Like Marcus Neal Jr. and Jeremiah Cooper were all Big 12 caliber players in my mind. So this roster and coaching staff, they have what it takes to do well in year one, especially with the schedule that they have in front of them. But there is variance too. I mean, Max Granville and Yvonne Kamoju, I hope that's the correct way to pronounce his name, and then Armstrong Noem and Keanu Williams, that's not exactly a very proven D-line. That's probably one of the worst starting defensive lines in the Big Ten. Penn State's offensive line has a good right side, and Malachi Goodman was highly recruited out of high school, has stayed with Penn State. Phil Trautwein did a good job building up that offensive line, but there are some unproven pieces there. And receiver is an upgrade over what Penn State has. It's not, they don't have what Iowa State had in 2024. They had 2 NFL receivers. They're not quite that good. So I just wanted to set the stage of the roster there from what I see out of this Penn State team. Offensively, I expect a good passing attack and a rushing offense that's competent. But the main strength of this team will be the tight end group. Penn State at tight end has Rappelia, who was well recruited out of high school, had a few hundred receiving yards last year. You have Benjamin Brahmer. You have Gabe Burkle. So Gabe Burkle had 302 receiving yards and a touchdown. Cooper Alexander had 47 receiving yards. Benjamin Brahmer had 446 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns. And Rappelia had 3 touchdowns and 180 receiving yards. All of them are tall. All of them are appropriately built. All of them could block. I wouldn't be shocked if you sometimes see this Penn State team go in 13 personnel. They because they have the personnel to do it. I mean, they have an awesome tight end group, and a tight end group that in my mind is clearly above any other group on the offensive side of the ball. Rocco Becht is good. Rocco Becht is not great. Rocco Becht has a very clear ceiling and a clear history. This running back group, they have some untapped potential with Peoples, Martin Jr., and Cam Wallace. But as of right now, I think it's going to be Carson Hansen and James Peoples as your number 1, number 2 backs, a combination of them. And they've each had their limitations and, or in the case of Peoples, issues at their previous stops. I love this tight end room, and I think that's how Penn State's going to function this year. They're going to be able to block well with these tight ends, and particularly they're going to have a great chemistry with the tight ends in the passing attack and depth there. They can sustain an injury at tight end, and you may not notice that there is an injury there. They have 3 quality, good to great power 4 starters in the tight end position. They do. And then everything else I'd say is a combination of above average to good. That's why I have the B+ grade there. You have an offense that will, at the very worst, be a little bit worse than Penn State's offense last year. And last year's Penn State offense wasn't bad, especially when we factor in that the staff was totally checked out after game 1 against Oregon. They were absolutely checked out. They were a good offense, maybe could show flashes of greatness, that happened to play 3 top 5 defenses last year in Indiana, Ohio State, and Oregon. And those defenses would make offenses better than Penn State's look silly. Look at Alabama's in the Rose Bowl. Look at Oregon's when Indiana played them. Look at Ohio State's offense, which was definitely better than Penn State's when Indiana played them. Held them to 10 freaking points. So at the very worst, you're going to get a little bit worse than that, but with a much easier schedule. So it'll be more entertaining. And at the very best, you can get a serious upgrade here, where the QB situation, the receiver situation is better, and that enables there to be an improvement offensively despite a talent drop-off at the running back and offensive line rooms. I also expect, due to the nature of how Campbell plays football, for the turnovers per game to be low, as they were last year. I do expect the yards per pass to improve, the quarterback sacked percentage to probably improve given the schedule. Yards per carry will be fascinating here. At one point, the schedule is so much easier where it could get better, but there's such a talent drop-off at O-line and running back, too. Defensively, this unit's going to get better. The defense suffered injuries last year. Jim Knowles in year 1 has had a pattern of not performing at the highest level. Last year, I think ultimately what it came down to, and I should have seen this given the history of Penn State, what Knowles had always at Ohio State was good D-line play. Appropriately sized, physical NFL defensive lineman. Even in year 1, he always had that. Always. And that's why in year 1, depending on the metrics you look at for Ohio State's 2022 defense, they were either universally top 25 or in some metrics, they were even still top 10 at the end of the year. And they just got broken in big games because they were still recovering from the insane experiment that was Kerry Combs. I'm a Jim Knowles guy. I'm a Jim Knowles defender. There are many people who probably hate me for that. Regardless of that, though, if you do not have the personnel to run the scheme you want to, it doesn't matter how damn good of a DC you are, it's not going to be fantastic. And Penn State last season, outside of Denied and Sutton, did not have complete defensive linemen or a whole lot of depth there. They were good at linebacker, and they had talent at secondary, but after Rojas went down, all they had was secondary and Denied and Sutton. And because of that Oregon loss, the team quits. They fold. So the defense wasn't really all that good. They didn't take away the football. The only thing they were good at is getting pressure. That's it. They got pressure against Ohio State. They got pressure against Indiana. They got pressure against Oregon just due to the holds in that game and Moore being a good QB. They couldn't exactly get home. It was all they were good at. And a lot of that was schematic, as very clearly the NFL draft would tell you outside of Denied and Sutton. They didn't have a lot of players up front on that defense to get the type of pressure that they did. The D-line, I'm looking at probably a B. Gave it some B+ due to my like of D'Anton Lynn and some of the talent they retained. They have a top 5 to top 10 linebacker group in the country, factoring in depth and my assumption that Rojas is going to be healthy. Corners, they have a top 15, top 10 corner group in college football, I believe. Safety, it's top 25. Special teams should be good, although I don't know how good it will be in comparison to last year's unit. So you're looking at a team here that is going to have probably a top 20 defense, I would assume, and a top 30 offense, and a good special teams unit. You're looking at a top 20 caliber team. At worst, top 25. That's how I see it in terms of power ratings here. Campbell is a head coach that I love. Mauser's a competent OC. D'Anton Lynn is going to be a bit undervalued now after his time at USC, but I don't know how much of that was him and how much of that is just Riley prioritizing the offense in practice. I don't know how much of that is which. It's probably a bit of both. Probably a bit of he wasn't as good as the UCLA job made him look, and also Riley didn't do him any favors at USC. I'm curious to see how all of that pans out this season. The base defense is the same, 4-2-5, as it has been at Penn State for quite some time, but Lynn comes from that NFL Ravens tree defense, and Knowles is not that. Like, Knowles 4-2-5 is a very strict 4-2-5, 3 high safety, more college than what D'Anton Lynn runs. I thought it would have been awesome if Matt Campbell kept Jim Knowles, have some type of scheme continuity, and I think Knowles is one of the best DCs out there, but I also think he probably wanted to change. I think that both of them wanted to change after the disaster that happened last season with James Franklin. I have Penn State as of right now 15th in my preseason power ratings. I will say I'll probably lower them at least a spot or maybe a handful, but still put them inside of the top 20 when, at the end of the day, I redo this before the season kicks off. They're a good team. There's a potential of them to be great at best. At the very worst, they'll be average or above average. And with all Penn State loses, I don't think that's all that insane to say, or that is a disappointment, honestly. I look at the staff, and it is one of the best staffs in the country. It is arguably a top 15 staff. What Campbell's done in Iowa State is undeniable. You cannot deny the success that he's had and how historic it is. You also look at what Penn State has offensively and defensively, and I think it's safe to say the defense, especially given it retains more talent from the previous regime than the offense does, and that makes sense because James Franklin's much more of an offensive guy than a defensive guy, and the offense was older last year than the defense was, especially at the key positions. And the defense, look, the defense when healthy was better than last year's offense. In the month of September, before the team quit, the defense looked the part of an elite defense at times. The offense never looked that way, even against bad teams. I think you're going to see that again this year. the defense, due to the increased talent, and I think having the superior coordinator, will be the better side of the football. The offense will have its moments of goodness. It'll also have its moments of you wanting to pull your hair out. Campbell does not score a lot of points. It will be more exciting than what Franklin has had in recent memory in terms of receiver play in big games, but honestly, I don't know if the scoring offense is going to look all that different in big games. Campbell's style is it's very much game management, very much making sure you can punch above your weight class, and they're going to have to do that in a few games this year. Like USC and Michigan will definitively have more blue chip talent than they do and probably more depth. Washington will probably have more depth, and it's a road game. So they're going to have to play in some games this year where it'll be probably lower scoring fistfights if they want to win, rather than a track race and seeing who can get around 4 or 5 laps the quickest, for example. In saying that, it's a good team. It's also a team that, with all the changes it has, over 50 new players, a huge changing of the guard, culturally and schematically, I do expect there to be bumps. So I look at Penn State, and I see 8-4 or 9-3. 10-2 is possible. There's also a universe where you could be looking at, say, 11-1 if everything goes correctly, or 6-6 if everything goes poorly. I think the average outcome with this Penn State team is 9-3 or 8-4, which is right in line with their win total. And the reason I side with 8-4 is I am much higher on Washington than almost anyone is. I might be the highest person on Washington, actually. And I'm higher on Michigan and USC than the mean. Also higher on Northwestern than the mean. I'm lower in exchange on Maryland, Minnesota, and Purdue. Although I don't know about Purdue, but Maryland and Minnesota for sure than most people. But Northwestern's going to be tough. Penn State, I think, when I look at these two teams, Penn State, from my angle, is closer in a lot of positions to a Northwestern than a USC, Michigan, or Washington. I think coaching will make up for some of that, but particularly on the offensive side of the ball, they don't have the game breakers or the depth or explosiveness, the twitch, at a lot of these positions that USC, Michigan, and Washington do. And Northwestern has that as good as they do, and they also have good DBs in the same way that Penn State does. So I think that it's going to be a year of ups and downs. Record-wise, they're almost a lock to get better. I can't really see this team go 6-6, though I guess hypothetically it could be possible. Even with the easy schedule, I can't really see this team go better than 11-1. I think they have enough holes in their roster and enough of a change at guard where one of Michigan, Washington, or USC, one of them is guaranteed to win, and therefore Penn State's guaranteed at least one loss. Penn State, interestingly enough, could drop in my power ratings, and yet I might have them win an additional game come my final predictions in early or middle August. That's my logic, my analysis behind this Penn State preview and record prediction. Let me know what you think down below. Got a little bit of an itch there, but now oh, shoot. I forgot about that, so I'm going to have to edit that in. I forgot about that. That's not a problem, though. It's not a problem, really, for you guys listening because it's a bottom bar. It's not an important side graphic, but I try to be a perfectionist. Sometimes it bites me, so... Okay, there we go. All right, last of the preview series, talking about the Washington Huskies here. Washington enters 2026 with Jedd Fisch in year 3 after a 9-4 season with the win over Boise State in the Los Angeles Bowl. It was quite an impressive year. 9-4 having to play, Michigan on the road, Oregon and Ohio State at home, and Washington returns a lot entering 2026. Ryan Walters is in year 2 as a defensive coordinator. Jedd Fisch will be calling plays. Damon Williams Jr. returns along with many defensive players, defensive stars. And Washington has a schedule that's workable, yes. Oregon and Indiana are games back-to-back at the end of the season, and they have to play Penn State and USC. But we're going to be talking about my full record prediction for Washington and also break down their roster and schedule and expectations here. I think a good place to start out with is their trend, what they've done under Jedd Fisch so far, and who they were last season. Washington went 9-4, winning the LA Bowl. Their win total this season is 7.5. Forget if it's juiced to the over or the under, but 7-5, 8-4 is what the books are expecting from the Huskies. And I know that it's year 3 of the Jedd Fisch era. And Damon Williams comes back, and I mentioned all those positives at the beginning. But this is a team that last year had a lot of ups and downs, and it was more so the case the year before. So far, Fisch is 15-11 at Washington. Recruiting has improved under his watch. They signed a top 15 class last year. Pretty phenomenal bunch that could bring Washington to the college football playoff one day, or maybe even a run there. They had their best team easily since 2023 last season. Their best under Jedd Fisch, including his time at Arizona, I would say. Or maybe a little bit worse than that 10-3 Arizona team, but pretty damn close. Entering year 3, they're going to be better power ratings-wise. They are going to be a quality of team that will improve along the lines of scrimmage. They'll take another step forward on defense, and I imagine Damon Williams will improve at quarterback. At the same time, though, they lose Denzel Boston, they lose Adam Muhammad, they lose Jonah Coleman, a lot of key skill position players, and the offensive line, you could argue, is what some would call weak returning production, where it was a weakness of last year's team. So while it should get better, how much do you want to rely on it getting better? It's going to be a fascinating question. But there's no doubt under Jedd Fisch so far that Washington is trending up, and last season that they were a good team. They deserved being ranked at the end of the year over Illinois, over Tennessee, over some of the G5 teams that got in the playoff, because Washington was just a better team than they were. They had a top 30, top 25 offense last year, and a defense that was top 20 to top 15, depending on where you looked. They were wonderful at stopping the run. They were okay at running the ball, in part because of the QB. When they lost games, it was due to the fact that their offense, and I would say particularly the quarterback position and offensive line, had issues scaling against the talented defenses. Wisconsin, Michigan, Oregon, and Ohio State owned them on the lines of scrimmage, with those D-lines owning Washington's O-line. That was the context of that, because my oh my, in those games too, Washington's D-line beat up those offensive lines and won those days. But Washington was missing big-time quarterback play in big games. Williams had a pretty, I would say, bad game against Michigan, bad game against Wisconsin, mediocre performances against Ohio State and Oregon. You hope that he takes a step up, that really the offensive line, particularly with what they're losing at running back, takes a step up, that Roebuck can continue to improve after having a good true freshman season, and that the defense continues making strides. I mean, they were pretty phenomenal last year given the type of players they had. Special teams is an area of emphasis for me that I'm looking at because of how poor it's been under Jedd Fisch so far at Washington, and it has cost them games at times. I think Wisconsin, it cost them last season. It cost them against Rutgers the year before, and there are other examples where Washington's special teams has not helped them whatsoever. Teams are a way for you to win games that maybe you shouldn't win with hindsight, or win a game that was a coin flip. But in the end, you say, well, because of how events played out, that coin flip game, Team A was always in the lead in a coin flip game because they made a big special teams play. So that's an area to pay attention to for Washington. Weakness from last year's team, special teams. Strength was run defense, and I would say the talent of the offense. The weakness was the execution of the offense in big games, and in addition to the special teams and the offensive line. This schedule reads to me like a schedule where Washington could have a breakthrough year. But if they don't improve on some things, the schedule could also break them. Washington State, Utah State, and Eastern Washington, cakewalks. They're going to start off 3-0. They then play Minnesota, travel to USC, host Iowa, travel to Purdue. Off a bye, they travel to Nebraska, host Penn State, travel to Michigan State, host Indiana, and travel to Oregon. So I look here in Big Ten play, and they should beat Minnesota. They'll start off 4-0. USC, that is a coin flippy game, or a game where USC is slightly favored in. Iowa, Washington will be a slight favorite, but Iowa could win that game. And traveling to Purdue, if you hosted Purdue, it was an auto win, but traveling to them could make some things tricky if Purdue improves. At Nebraska won't be easy. Hosting Penn State won't be easy. Playing at Michigan State after games against Nebraska and Penn State and before games against Indiana and Oregon, that's going to be tricky. And then obviously, Indiana and Oregon back-to-back, I have those two as my top 2 power-rated teams in America. So Washington has the toughest 2-game stretch in college football in games where they're back-to-back to each other. They have that toughest stretch in college football in my mind, having to play Indiana one week and then the next week, oh, guess what? You have to play at the Oregon Ducks, who I have as my preseason number 1 team. So I understand the 7.5 win total. They're going to be underdogs in 3 games, possibly even 4, and they'll be slight favorites in anywhere from 2 to 3 games, I would say. They only have 5 to 6 guaranteed wins on their schedule, and in a lot of the games that aren't guaranteed wins, they're going to be underdogs or big, sizable underdogs. I'm impressed with the starting lineup, though, having said all of that. Washington pretty much has 2 questions. Jaden Lamar at running back, and that running back group, how effective are they? What's the drop-off from last year's group? And wide receiver outside of Desmond Roebuck. Tight end, quarterback, offensive line should all improve from where they were last year. Same with every position on the defensive side of the football. Now that Walters is in year 3, has better players at defensive back in my mind, has a deeper linebacker group, a deeper and better defensive line. I love what I'm seeing out of Washington entering this fall, and it is crazy how underrated they are. Crazy. Why does no one have them top 15? Why do so many preseason polls have them outside the top 25? Why? What about this roster indicates a team that is anything but a top 25 team? I don't understand it, personally. I get some questions that they lost some NFL players, and they're relying on Christian Moss, a Kennesaw State transfer, Rashid Williams, who's been with the program for 4 years and hasn't done much, and Desmond Roebuck and a lot of freshmen to do well at receiver, Roebuck now being a sophomore. I understand skepticism about starting a freshman left tackle, though Cody Green was pretty damn good. He may have been the starting left tackle at Oregon had he stayed committed there. That was a pretty big flip on their part. And they have 3 seniors in the offensive line. John Mills was a really good true freshman for them last year, and they brought him back. And they returned Damon Williams. But the offense should get better. At least its floor should be higher because of the experience at so many key positions, especially the offensive line and QB. Don't know if the ceiling will be higher because of what they have at receiver and running back, but we'll see. The defense, everything's going to be better. You can't convince me of that. They didn't lose many key players from last year. They didn't. Their biggest losses were in the secondary, where they were older last year but had some issues. Ryland Dillard-Allen, Dylan Robinson, and Rashawn Clark, all year 3 or year 2 players, they come back. Alex McLaughlin comes back at strong safety, where he was pretty good. And at linebacker, Jacob Manu, Ziri Alexander, Zadarius Rainey-Sale, and Tariq Al-Uqda. You have 3 seniors in that top 4 linebackers, and Rainey-Sale was a true freshman last year who played enough to not get redshirted, having a sack, an interception, 13 solo tackles, 6'2", like appropriately sized. They're getting better players, especially on the defensive side of the football. And they are top 15 in returning production. They returned 65% of their production entering this season. So if you return that much from a top 25 power-rated team, and you were 9-4 last year, why aren't you a top 25 team preseason? I'll tell you why. Want to know why Washington isn't ranked? because no one watches them, because college football media is full of a bunch of idiots, not to go on a ramble. They don't watch the games. The AP voters don't watch the games. They don't. And the evidence is right here in front of you that this team with these names is not ranked. I mean, they faced Oregon, Michigan, Ohio State, Wisconsin. They played Rutgers and Antoine Raymond. Washington, last season, they had to, go on the road and play UCLA. And I know that UCLA was down and Rutgers wasn't super good last year, but they played some top-end Big Ten games. They didn't have a schedule that, in my opinion, like Maryland had. They had to travel to Maryland. They had to play Illinois at home. They held opponents to 4 yards per carry in year one of a system that Ryan Walters is very specific about. He's not very flexible, and they ran it well. And now they're going to be in year two. And they had a great QB, and they were competitive with, out of the 8 quarters, they played top 5 teams, Oregon and Ohio State. They were competitive for 6 of those quarters. 6 of them, 6 out of 8, for 75% of those games. They were competitive in year 2 versus year 4 of Lanning, and I believe it was 19, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, year 8 of Ryan Day. Thought it was year 7 or 8, but just wanted to count to make sure. Just crazy stuff that Washington did last year, and in a good way. Crazy in a good way, not in a bad way. The offense this year will be stronger at passing than rushing because of what they have at quarterback, because Williams will be protected now, and their tight end group with Decker DeGraff is solid. This is going to be Washington's best tight end group since 2023 or 2022. Could be even better than that. Receivers I still like because of Roebuck, and I trust Jed Fish being an offensive mind and the success that he had recruiting and developing receiver in Arizona, and what he also did at Washington with Denzel Boston. I trust him there. My only concern with Washington is their ability to scale in big games offensively. It's to a smaller degree than last year, but you can't always fix a sack percentage that was 119th in one season. You can't always fix some of the breakdowns Damon Williams had in one season, especially when, let's face it, Oregon is going to have a better defense than it did last year, where they held Washington to 14 points, despite not having a ton of success in the end zone. And Indiana's defense is going to be a defense, in my mind, that's only going to allow 0.175 points per play, which is what Ohio State allowed last year. So they're going to be facing great defenses. Iowa's defense is going to be damn good. USC should improve under Gary Patterson. Nebraska's won't be an absolute pushover like it was last year. So really the key to this offense improving is not just Williams growing as a player. It's the offensive line living up to its potential, or better living up to its potential than it did last year. Defensively, this unit is strong. They're going to do a better job of getting pressure. I don't know by how much. Their calling card, though, won't be sacks. It won't be pressures. They'll be improved in coverage, and the calling card will be stopping the run. You will have to throw on this team to beat them. And if you are able to hit the deep shot to Malik Benson as Dante Moore did, then Ryan Walters will tip his cap, say okay, and they'll just do that thing again. Because it's going to be hard with how often they prevent you from getting in third and medium and third and short for you to consistently move the football on them. It's going to be very challenging. They already last year were really good in preventing touchdowns, in having success in the red zone, in stopping the ground game. They were among one of the nation's best rushing defenses last year, and that was with very limited personnel. The job that Ryan Walters did on defense last year was one of the most impressive coordinator jobs of the season. I did not think that Washington was going to be phenomenal last year. I underestimated them last year, and at the end of the day, the biggest reason why is I underestimated what Walters would do in year one. I kind of thought Washington last year was a bunch of Jags and Denzel Boston and the quarterback, Damon Williams. Even Jonah Coleman. I didn't love Jonah Coleman as much as others did, and I did not like the O-line. Well, I was correct about the O-line, but what I missed is, hey, like Jacob Manu, Ziri Alexander, the defensive line, and some of the younger players like Rylon Dillard Allen, and some others at DB that panned out to be really good as younger players or improved from where they were under Stephen Belichick, the first defensive coordinator in Jed Fish's tenure at Washington in 2024. I love this defense. I have it as a top 15 defense inarguably, and I might even have it as a top 10 defense. We'll have to see where exactly that lands. Jed Fish, I think as an offensive play caller, I'd probably give him a A- or B+. Head coach, I'd give him an A- or an A. I think he's done a really good job there. Definitely a top 15 coach in my book. Could be a top 10 coach at the end of the year, depending on how things shake out. Walters, for me, not an A+ for sure, but also certainly not anything lower than an A-. He is a top 10 defensive coordinator. Just look at his time at Illinois. Look at his first year at Washington. The reason Purdue didn't go well is he was trying to be both a defensive coach and the head coach. That doesn't always pan out. Some can do it. Others cannot, and I don't think Ryan Walters was one of the men that could. But he is an excellent defensive coordinator. Do not get it mistaken that he is a bad defensive coordinator because he was a bad head coach. In my mind, Ryan Walters right now is probably a bit of what Will Muschamp was back then, and we'll see if he's still that this year, where not a good head coach, anything but a good head coach. But my goodness, like, he's the inverse of that when it comes to defensive play calling. He's one of the best defensive coordinators in America right now. I have Washington power rated 13th. If I am to move them higher or lower, I would not move them lower. Might move them higher. Might, but probably only by like a spot or so. I think 13th is pretty generous. And obviously, generosity is deserved for this team after all I told you about them. I respect them a lot. I love what they have defensively and love what they have offensively, not to the same degree, but on paper, they have much like a lot of Big Ten teams, a top 20, top 15 staff. They have a top 15, top 10 quarterback, which is huge. The offense as a whole should improve from where it was last year, where it was a average, above average Power 4 offense. It should be an above average to good Power 4 offense. The defense was a good Power 4 defense. It should be a great Power 4 defense. You are looking at a top 15 team this year, and it is a travesty that so many content creators, that so many college football experts, and that so many experts or channels don't talk about this team as being good. They're good. I don't know if they will be great. I mean, I just said a little while ago, inarguable top 15 defense. But I think it might be a defense where they're also definitively not top 10. I'd have to look into it a little bit more. I've done a lot of research on the defense, but I always like to tidy things up a little bit before the fall starts. And Washington's a team to me that, based on what I'm seeing and what they bring back, they are going to have a very tightly bound range of outcomes. I'd have a very hard time seeing this team compete for a title, maybe if everything went right because of what they have at QB and the defensive play caller they have. Maybe, but no, as of right now. I also can't see them go anything worse than probably 7-5. Like the bounds for this team are pretty tight here. High floor due to the experience, due to the minds they have, due to the talent they have at certain positions. Low ceiling because of some questions I have about depth, their ability to scale offensively in big games, and defensively, pass rush is ultimately what decides ceiling on defense and defensive line play. And I think defensive end right now is their weakest position there. For Washington, I have the Huskies again rated 13th. I believe they will be a fringe college football playoff contender with a 9-3, 6-3 Big Ten record. Most likely, they're going 8-4. I just think adding up the probabilities show that they'll probably have closer to 4 losses than 3. But 8-4, 9-3, those are their top 2 most likely record outcomes. Floor of 7-5, ceiling of 11-1. That's what I have right there and right now. I have them beating all of their opponents, including Big Ten teams Minnesota, Iowa, Purdue, Nebraska, Penn State, Michigan State, but losing on the road to USC in a close game, losing at home to Indiana in probably a close game that somewhat resembles Indiana traveling to Iowa or Penn State last year, and then Oregon probably would be their only double-digit loss of the season, if I'm being honest. They'll probably have a close win against Nebraska or in Iowa too. They'll win some close games, lose a close game, or lose some close games, win some close games. Most of the time you see Washington, if you watch them, and you should, they will look like a good team. That stretch at the end of the year with Indiana and Oregon back-to-back is so fascinating because there's a really good chance that they beat USC and they enter Indiana undefeated. Like, what if, and I highly doubt Washington will be the better team than Indiana. Highly doubt that. They're almost a lock to be an underdog in that game. And at the very worst for Indiana, Washington's a lock to be an underdog neutral field to the Hoosiers. What if Indiana loses to Ohio State or Michigan in a close game and Washington's undefeated? And they have to travel, like, that would be so weird. But I don't think it would be. But it would be so weird and so strange to so many people. They have it set up to have a great year this year. I think they're a year away from being a real firm, like, college football playoff contender. But they're certainly a dark horse to reach the playoff, in my opinion. And they're one of the 15 best teams in America. That's my Washington preview and record prediction. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below. I'm very optimistic about that team this year. Incredibly, incredibly optimistic. Okay. Wow. Let's see how much longer we have here. So 32, 24. Okay. I think we'll be able to get through all of this. How are you guys doing? We have really maintained a lot of concurrent viewership here. I'm impressed with all of you. We had that drop off after I took that needed break, but we've stabilized at about 80. That's pretty impressive. If you guys haven't already, it would be really cool if we reached 100 likes on this live show. Please like the stream, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you, Jamie, for loving the channel, Easy for commenting, Isaac for commenting. Thank you to Moody Meatball and the Pissed Ohioan for being moderators on the show. Really appreciate you guys. Let's talk now about something that surrounds Ohio State football, and not really in a positive way here. This is a myth about Ohio State that gets talked about a lot on social media, and I want to be a myth buster for at least 8 to 10 minutes here. So let me know down below what you think makes Ohio State such an elite program. Is it the coaching? Are they just inherently that good? Let me know. The Ohio State football program is the best in college football, right now and historically. Yet it often gets called an underachieving program. I see it all the time on social media, in my YouTube comments, and sometimes even Buckeye fans will call it that. One of the biggest myths in college football right now is that top programs are invulnerable, no matter who leads them. It's assumed that Kirby Smart or Ryan Day, or in the past Nick Saban, you sometimes hear this excuse about Saban today, well, they just won because of all the talent they had. It didn't take that much coaching. And that's a huge myth. That's the biggest myth about Ohio State football right now, is they're invincible. They're not. They're recession-proof because Ryan Day is an elite head coach, and because Ohio State's administration always puts football first and makes wise decisions surrounding football. Ryan Day has won a national championship. Ryan Day has developed NFL talent at an elite rate, recruited at a high level. He's been in the college football playoff conversation every year, even in the 4-team era, and that's not underachievement. When you add on the fact that he's won a title and he has an 87% win percentage, he has a winning record against the power-rated top 10, he's overachieved at Ohio State, I would argue. Some will say, well, he underachieved with all the talent he had. Do you guys not understand that with the postseason being longer than ever, and with the talent being more even than ever, and Ohio State and Georgia being disproportionately hurt by the NIL era because they have so many talented players that they almost never get seniors because they go pro, but other teams can bring their seniors back if they're not getting a first-round grade. That's a rambling way of saying Day has had more disadvantages to deal with at Ohio State than Jim Tressel or Urban Meyer did by a mile. And yet he has maintained their standard. He wins 11 games or more every year so far. And even with tough schedules or easy schedules, he does that. He has a national title. He has 2 Big Ten titles. Ohio State didn't have to hire Ryan Day. He was never a head coach before, only an offensive play caller. And yet they did. In fact, they kind of sidelined Urban Meyer a bit. After seeing how Day was doing offensively and coaching in those 3 games, Urban Meyer, I don't think he wanted to retire, didn't want to leave Ohio State. But Ohio State makes a decision, puts Ryan Day in there as the head coach, and now Ohio State is at its peak in the Ryan Day era in terms of adding up multiple seasons of Day together. You have 2022 until now, or 2023 until now, whenever you want to look at the start of the national championship and then the elite reloading job of last year. And who knows, maybe this whole process of being anywhere from the second best team to the best team in America, maybe that continues into next year and years after that. Where Ryan Day has put Ohio State is in such a good position that to act like it's only because of Ohio State's inherent edges is a dishonest and low intelligence, lazy argument. I've had guests before on the show, most notably Bald Father Betts, but others too, who would tell you Day has leveled up the program from where Urban Meyer had it. And Urban Meyer leveled up the program from a roster and recruiting angle from where Tressel had it. That is not the mark of an elite. It is the mark of an elite institution. What I meant to say is it's not the mark of the invincible institution, because no institution is invincible. Rome rose and fell. America will rise and fall. Every empire has risen and fall. Michigan at one point was the number 1 program in the Big Ten, like very briefly in 2023, and for a good chunk of the 20th century. They rose and they fell. Ohio State has even had moments, like when they promoted Luke Fickell to be the interim head coach. That year sucked. They were the most talented team in the Big Ten, and they sucked. Why? Because Fickell wasn't the guy in that season. Even that one small year should bust that whole argument that Day isn't an elite head coach or that Ohio State is an underachieving program. And I can already see comments saying, where have you heard this, Sam? I hear it all the time on social media. I see it in my comment sections. This is a program that just makes good decisions 95% of the time. And the 5% of the time they don't make a good decision, it's rectified for a positive change in 2 years. Think about Kerry Combs. That was a mistake. Within a year and a half, Day realizes, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? And he fires him, and he gets Jim Knowles, and Jim Knowles is the biggest reason they win the national title in 2024. And then after Knowles, he leaves unexpectedly. He gets Patricia, and Patricia's the biggest reason why Ohio State reloads last year and why they have a generational defense. He sees that Hartline isn't ready to be the OC. makes a change after 1 year, gets Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly helps their rushing attack, even with the offensive line injuries, helps it schematically, and then brings in Arthur Smith after Hartline as a play caller kind of disappoints again. They make elite decisions. College football, so much of it isn't meritocratic. Like, let's be fair about that. 2001 Miami, it wasn't fair that Larry Coker won that title and that someone else that year did not because he was a bad coach. It was not fair that Ed Orgeron gets to have a natty and D'Antonio doesn't, or Bo Schembechler doesn't, or like even John Cooper honestly deserves a national title more than Ed Orgeron does. Like, there are unfair things that happen. It's not because of Alabama's elite decision making that they're in a more talent-rich state than Michigan is, or that Indiana is. Like, that's not meritocratic. But college football is a very meritocratic sport, especially now that the talent is evening out more at the top, and that you can just, oh my gosh, well, I don't have the talent that Georgia high school football does, but I have a billionaire who's interested, and if I entertain him properly, I can now get high-level talent more than I could before. To win at the level Ohio State has won at requires brains. It requires being tactical. It requires those things. It, in the end, requires eliteness. It requires strength of character. It requires goodness. Like, goodness is in making good decisions, being a good college football coach, team, culture. And Ohio State has all those things. I mean, you look at the past Ohio State head coaches here. Woody Hayes, Earl Bruce, even John Cooper, Jim Tressel, Urban Meyer, Ryan Day. All of them win 70% or more of their games. And none of them were bad hires. Even Cooper. Cooper was a good coach at Arizona State and was at Ohio State for over a decade because he was able to field some pretty good teams there. Teams that maybe if they had a 4-team playoff or a 12-team playoff could have won it all. And yet he's their worst coach by win percentage and probably their worst coach given some of the low years he had with the Buckeyes. And he wasn't a bad coach. He just wasn't elite. Tressel in his heyday was an elite coach. Meyer in his heyday was an elite coach. Day right now is an elite coach. And I think the best one on this list, with the exception of Woody Hayes. Hayes is number one until Day has a few more years under his belt. But isn't that incredible? Multiple athletic directors, multiple school presidents, some tumultuous things, as a lot of powerhouse programs do. You know, a scandal here, a scandal there. Though not recently, though. The program's been very clean recently. And despite that, the football program is in an elite shape, and they do not have down seasons, or if they do, it's very rare. They win a national championship. The average so far has been once every 10 years. That's way more than most programs can ask for. And I don't know. I find it incredible. I'm a Michigan graduate, and I will tell you guys right now, everyone's like, oh, you know, Crane and Company, all three of their co-hosts took coaches over Day. One of them took Mario Cristobal over Day. The other took Lane Kiffin over Day in a coach ranking. And the other took Steve Sarkisian. That is absurd. That's ridiculous. There's no intelligence behind that take. I am a Michigan fan and grad. I will tell you right now, I would fire Kyle Whittingham to make Day my head coach. Because if I make Day Michigan's head coach, with their resources and with who I know Day is, and the fact that I know Ohio State probably couldn't hire a coach that would be better than Day because the odds of doing so would just be so small, I would know that all of a sudden I've leveled up Michigan's place in college football and put down my biggest rival. And Ohio State deserves credit for making that hire when so many schools don't want to promote an offensive coordinator. They're looking for what's already proven, not for the next new thing that 10 years down the line is going to be the most proven thing out there. And that's the foresight and decision-making of a school like Ohio State that separates it from a school like Michigan. Ohio State and Michigan are not that different in terms of brand, in terms of resources. But why Ohio State has separated from Michigan in some of those areas is they've made good decisions, and Michigan has made a series of crappy decisions and pretty much lucked themselves into getting Jim Harbaugh. They were blessed that Jim Harbaugh at the time was pushed out by Jed York by the 49ers, and Michigan wanted him and had a coach opening. That's pretty fortunate, right? That's what makes Ohio State recession-proof here. What makes Ohio State recession-proof is great decision-making. It is just as simple as that. It's that they have a great staff. They ensure that they hire a great staff. And on top of that, that great staff understands that recruiting at a high level, developing at a high level, these are the things that help you be the most consistent program in college football. They have a top 5 DC, an NFL offensive coordinator. They have Larry Johnson as their D-line coach. They have James Laurinaitis as their linebackers coach. They had the nation's #1 position coach for years there in Brian Hartline. And they have Ryan Day, who's a top 3 coach in America. So it doesn't get better than that at most spots. And it doesn't get better historically than Ohio State, unless you're Alabama. That's what makes Ohio State recession-proof and so good, is their decision-making. It's not because they're invincible. You couldn't take a homeless person off the street like some people want to believe and win at Ohio State. Can't do that. I mean, Fickell's a good coach and was a good DC when he was the interim, and he lost 7 games. And that was in an era where Ohio State had a much larger advantage than it does now. They can't stack talent the same way they used to. They don't have the cupcake Big Ten schedules they used to have, where they had a huge talent edge over everyone they played. That's not how it works anymore. And they keep winning because of who they are and because of their identity, not because of their genetics. They're not like the kid who's they are the kid who's inherently rich, but just makes better decisions than everyone else, so he gets even richer than his father was. That's what Ohio State is. Ohio State is much closer to a Bruce Wayne than a trust fund kid who burns all of their money, and that is why they're so good. Hopefully that analogy landed with someone. Hopefully that, is pretty inarguable. Looks like it is pretty inarguable. Looks like you guys agree with that. I mean, I don't know how you could disagree with that. Let's talk about USC's long-term goals, though. Their long-term vision with Lincoln Riley, who they poached from Oklahoma, and things just haven't panned out the way that they exactly thought there. At least I don't think. Just responding to a text here. Okay, let's finish this out. Probably at 8:30 or 8:40, I'm going to have to hard out, and that might cancel a segment again, but it is what it is. Okay, let's... Lincoln Riley. The offensive maverick that can't defend the forward pass. USC's football program has more built-in advantages than almost any program in the country, but Lincoln Riley's tenure has been defined by talented rosters that can't get over the hump and can't close the gap on defense. And they haven't been title caliber teams either. Even the 2022 team, if they made the college football playoff, they wouldn't have been ranked in the top 10 of FPI. They would have been closer to TCU that year. USC's long-term goal should always be winning championships in their conference, in the college football playoff level. So having said that, what should USC expect out of Riley both this season and in the long term? What do the Trojans have to do to get to the mountaintop is the topic of this segment. Remember, back when USC poached Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma, they thought they were getting a coach who was this close. Maybe even a better example. Let me just click my mechanical pencil here. if either of you can see the size of this piece of lead on the screen, they thought they were that close to winning it all, or Riley was that close. And with more resources at USC than Oklahoma, that he could do it. Well, this gap turned into the gap of this entire Penn after year one. Defense hadn't been fixed, got patty caked by Utah in the Pac-12 title game, lost to Utah in the regular season, lost to Tulane. But there was optimism for the following year. Eventually what happens is the gap by halfway through the 2023 season is as big as this remote, top to bottom, to Riley winning it all. You think, oh, shoot, well, Colorado can't run the ball, and they're running the ball on us, and we almost lost to Arizona. But hey, we got it against Notre Dame. The Notre Dame game happens, and now the gap is as big as my massive Samsung, which I love my Samsung, by the way. I will not disrespect you that much longer by comparing you to an Alex Grinch defense. But the gap is now this big after Notre Dame blows them out. And eventually get to the point where I could pick up my whole computer monitor that's in front of me. And at the end of the 2023 season and the end of the 2024 season, that's the gap between Riley winning a title and where he is right now. 2025 was at least better. They won 7 Big Ten games. They looked physical against Michigan and Iowa, and they're clearly trending up. But they still have a ways to go. And a huge talking point in the preseason this year is, what's the expectation for Riley? Is it national title or bust? Is it, well, not national title or bust, but is it college football playoff or bust? And will it be national title or bust next year or in future seasons? And that is a really interesting question, because with how they've been recruiting and how long he's been there, he'll be entering year 5. Yeah, you got to show us something. Whether that means you finally beat all the teams you should, which that would be an improvement over every USC season. Even in 2022, they should have beaten Utah at least once. They certainly should have beaten Tulane, and they didn't. Every year under Riley, they have lost at least a game that by talent and by point spread and by power rating they had no business losing, or they at least shouldn't have lost. That would be an improvement. Hey, we lost to the big 3, but we went 9-3 and beat everyone who was top 15, top 25. We just didn't beat a top 5 team. That would be an improvement over what we've seen from Riley so far. But would that be enough? You probably missed the playoffs at 9-3 with that schedule. What about just beat a top 10 opponent, even if it means you lose a game you should? Or do you have to win 10 games and get to the college football playoff for the season to be a success? I don't know. I certainly will tell you that USC probably has to win 9 games. They have to go over their 8.5 win total preseason for the season to at least not be a failure, for it to not be a disappointment. They've been building towards, not necessarily this year, I think they're more so building towards 2027 and 2028, but this team should be able to compete with 2 of the big 3, Oregon, Ohio State, and Indiana. They should compete with 2 of them. They should beat everyone else, and maybe on a given Saturday, they should beat one of Oregon or Ohio State at home. They should. They absolutely should. And if all you care about is brand and not matchups, they internally probably should expect to beat Indiana, including in that group, like one of the big 3. So the long-term goal should be championships. Eventually, you got to get there. It has been year 5. I've been very public in saying I think Riley is really entering year 3, and that the first 2 years of the Alex Grinch experiment were an entirely different era because of how bad that defense was and the philosophy that you had to have as a coach to even employ Grinch as your DC. There's a reason he was a good DC at Wazoo. All Mike Leach wants to do is pull off a few upsets and win some games and be an innovator, but he has his way of doing things, and he's not going to change. And Leach, without being at a really high-end program and maybe making some adjustments to his scheme, was not going to win a title, though he is a legend in his own way. If you're going to win a title, you don't employ the Alex Grinch defense. There are certain defenses that do well with certain schemes that you're just not going to use if you want to compete for titles. And Riley made that mistake. He course-corrected from it. So I kind of, in conjunction with after firing Grinch, they're immediately in the Big Ten. I kind of view this as year 3 for Riley more than year 5. But year 3 at USC should result in you having championship DNA and championship level behaviors. They already have that offensively. The question you're looking at with USC this year is, again, the defense. Where is the defense? How physical is it? Does it show up and make big plays in big moments, which last year it really didn't still? And how fundamentally sound are they? How disciplined is this team? For Riley himself, he needs to work on game management and finding ways for this team to achieve good things on the road and in tough travel spots. Pete Carroll, this is what USC's expectation should be. Pete Carroll, from 2003 to 2007, had USC functioning at a top 10 level every single season. Every season from 03 to 05, their scoring offense was in the top 6. In 06 and 07, it was in the top 30. And if you adjust scoring offense for like what the offense actually wanted to do, they pretty much always had a top 15 offense. Defensively, outside of maybe 05, they pretty much always had a top 10 defense. They always had elite recruiting. Always, always, always had elite recruiting. And the elite recruiting is returned. Even this season, where USC probably will not sign a top 10 recruiting class, they will finish top 5 in quality for the 2027 recruiting class. So recruiting has been fixed. But that should amp up the pressure on Riley, especially after the 27 class is at least a year or two to curate, to develop, to be nurtured. Because if the elite recruiting is fixed and the alignment is fixed, and it is within USC, and he's still not winning, well, USC's a top 5 job. So it's the same thing with Penn State and James Franklin. Like, I think James Franklin's probably a top 25 caliber coach, but Penn State's a top 15 program. So at some point, even if you risk getting worse by firing him, because it is hard to have 2 top 25 head coaches back to back, and especially a coach with the floor that Franklin had, they should risk it, because they should be shooting to have seasons where they're clearly top 5, at least sometimes if you're that high end of a program, and they never had that with Franklin. At USC, you're a top 5 program in the modern era with your resources, with your history. You're an arguably top 5. You're one of the 5 best jobs in America. So if Riley is playing, coaching like a top 25, top 20 head coach, your likelihood of upgrading from him is actually decently high. So you should get rid of him if he can't break through. And I don't know when that time is. I think it's sometime in the next 2 years. Not 2, 3. If by 2028 USC hasn't won a playoff game, and by playoff game, I mean against like a top 10 caliber team. If they have not won big in a way, he should be gone. This should be the expectation. Competing for national championships, competing for Big Ten championships. They've nailed the recruiting aspect, but they have in no way nailed the physicality aspect or checked the defense box. They just haven't done it. Look at Riley's defenses in his 5 seasons. Last season at Oklahoma, 5 seasons at USC. This defense has never been anything other than FBS average. It's always been below average, maybe average at best Power 4, and terrible Power 4. In some instances, it's even terrible FBS. In 2023 and 2022, there were double-digit G5 defenses that were genuinely more effective than USC's. That's unacceptable. That's atrocious. That's bad. There were G5 defenses last season that were better than USC's even in 2024. And that's unacceptable. Lynn made improvements, and I don't blame Lynn for the past 2 seasons. You can see the jump on the graphic. Made a huge, huge jump defensively. But the jump was from last place to middle of the road. You got to make that jump now to great. And we'll see. USC last year was not a bad team. In fact, they were a pretty good team, I would say. Again, good, not great. but they impressed me in ways, especially what they were able to do at home and stepping up in some of these games against top 15 teams like Iowa, or beating Michigan and crushing them the way that they did. This is a good lineup, and I think this is a year where I'm going to lay out the expectation right now. You got to go 9-3. Anything less than 9-3 is a failure. At 9-3, SC fans can comfortably take the patience pill because you win as many regular season games as you did last year with a much tougher schedule, and that results in an improvement. 10-2, you have your guy. Because while USC is now recruiting at an elite level, they do not yet have those players starting. So for USC to beat one of the big three and everyone else, or two of the big three, and they just, say, drop a game to Penn State on the road, that means they're actually punching above their weight class, given the schedule they have. And at that point, you get really excited for 2027 when they should bring most of their players back again, and 2028 when that recruiting class is going to be in year 3 and they might have one of the best rosters, period, in college football by that point. Key players I'm looking at that will decide whether they meet this expectation. You're looking at, I would say, Terrell Anderson and Tanu Kynes at receiver. You are looking at the health of Killian O'Connor at center, and that entire defensive line. Braylon Shelby, Alex Van Summeren, Jade Abasiri, and Cameron Crawford. That's what you're looking at here that will determine the outcome of the season and whether or not USC plays to its potential or anywhere close. And if they do that, they're going to win 9-10 games. If they play to their absolute ceiling and Ohio State, Oregon, and Indiana disappoint, I could even see 11-1. Don't know how likely that is, though. The expectation shouldn't be playing to your ceiling because not every program can do that every year. But with this schedule, you got to beat all your non-conference opponents, and all your road games except for Indiana, you got to go out and win those. And if you lose to Penn State on the road, well, they're not a Big Three member. So in order to get to 9-3, if you lose to Penn State, you got to beat one of Oregon, Ohio State, or Indiana. This USC team has got to go, and future USC teams have to do this too. When you play on the road against a team that is not top 10, you got to beat them. And occasionally you can drop an upset loss. You can. But that's just occasionally. It's just a rare thing. The elite programs don't do that. The elite programs only drop games to near elite or elite programs. They don't drop games to this version of Penn State on the road or Wisconsin on the road. Certainly not Rutgers on the road. If you're USC, you got to make sure that UCLA under Bob Chesney doesn't try to usurp you this year. You got to put them in their place from your perspective. You got to beat Washington. You got to beat your Penn States. You got to beat the teams you should beat. And then you got to be competitive against Oregon, Ohio State, and Indiana. Or if you're not competitive in one or even, no, it's not acceptable to not be competitive in two. You got to be competitive in all but one of your games. And you got to win all but 3 of them, at least. Big-time programs rarely suffer blowouts. And when they suffer losses, they're competitive. And they rarely lose at that. So that's how I view USC this year from an expectation angle. And moving forward, the expectation is to compete for Big Ten titles, for national titles, and win the Big Ten or compete for winning the Big Ten some years and being able to go on playoff runs for multiple seasons, not just in a one-off incident. Okay. Finally. Wow. What a show we've had. What a show we've had. So many views, so many likes, so many concurrent viewers. And yet I look at what we're doing right now and I think that I'm going to have to move some of these to the next time. Let's just check that out before I make that confirmation, though. Because this was long. We talked about these two, talked about the Big Ten. Yeah, I mean, we talked a lot, I would say. Oh, wow. It's a good show, guys. It's a good show. Don't know if we're going to be done with it yet. I mean, there is that, is Kyle Whittingham overrated? Like, that's a segment that I would love to touch on. There were the bold predictions I wanted to get to, but I don't know. I mean, ranking the top 10 Big Ten games, head coaches. Yeah, I think at this point we can be done. We have 6 segments that'll get us until Tuesday's live show. And I just went too long, and that was my own fault. I mean, this is a 3-hour show for 6 segments because one of my segments was the whole hour. Gotta stop doing that. Really gotta stop doing that. But it was a good show. So thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for talking. I don't want my shows to be any longer than 3 hours, so I do think this is kind of a natural cutting off point. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit that notification bell. I have 70 of you in here right now, so before I get off, I just want to say, we are live Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday at 5 p.m. I have not been the best with consistency on my live shows, but we've been live at least once per week for pretty much most of the year, sometimes 2 times, rarely even 3. I think that from here on out, we'll be able to consistently go live 2 to 3 times per week. Yes, we're producing a lot of content. Yes, the demand is high. Yes, sometimes I might burn myself out or overwork myself, but I have really good contractors. I have really good viewers in you guys, and I have been learning how to automate things and just make my life easier in some regards for tasks that I don't want to do, which allows me to go over my limit of 2 hours, and I go 3 hours, and now I, will have an extra hour of recording this week that I didn't plan on, and still things are going to be fantastic. Absolutely fantastic because of things that we have set in place. So, thank you guys for tuning in. Do any of you have any interesting things that you want to say before I get on out of here? I'll wait for like 2 minutes, see if there's anything interesting. Like, first interesting thing you guys get to say in the live show, I'll just comment on it for a minute, then we'll get on out of here. In the meantime, I'm just gonna kind of plan out what I want to do tomorrow. Let's just say that. No, did not mean to do that, man. Yep, that's about right. Okay, yeah, I'm going to be recording for like 11 hours this week, which is insane. Usually I only want to do like 8, maybe 9. Sam, do you have any thoughts on Steve Day saying that Day is going to leave OSU for the Kansas City Chiefs jobs this year if Andy Reid retires? He's done this every year. And I've had Dace on my show, and I actually think he does a pretty good job. Like, he also runs a political show. We don't talk politics on here. But, like, what Josh Pate did in interviewing Trump was a mistake because it blurred the line between him being able to compartmentalize politics and sports to his viewership, and that's not healthy. Like, I'll make history references or even political references here, but it's always with the guys that, like, I am neutral and I am not going to tell you how to vote on this channel. I'm not going to be your priest or your political and religious guide, because I, on this channel, care more about whether Ryan Day, Curt Cignetti, or Kirby Smart are given respect they deserve rather than who's president, because that is my job. Dace does a good job of that on Michigan Podcast. So I'm saying that to soften my blow of, no, I do not agree with that, and I don't know why he keeps predicting it. Maybe he'll look like a genius this year, and I will look like an idiot in hindsight for questioning that. But I think Day's going to be at Ohio State for a long time. And in college football specifically for a long time. I think so. So that was an interesting question, the Pissed Ohioan. Thank you for that. Anything else any one of you want to ask me very quickly? For LFG 900 or 904, that was Trey Sermon. That was OU's nice running back that finished at Ohio State. And Sermon was really good when healthy. Like, really explosive back. All right, guys. My time here has come to an end. Thank you guys for coming on. Love you guys so much. By tomorrow, this will be up on Spotify. I'll have timestamps for this, because after this, I'm probably going to honestly take a chill pill for much of tonight because of how long we went. And yeah, these segments will be out in the next few days. The segments that we missed will either be on upcoming shows, or I will record them independently and release them. So thank you so much. Love you guys so much. See you guys very soon. Bye. And for those of you listening on Spotify, my apologies for not ending right as I said bye. You get this interesting tidbit where I probably